The air in the Ministry's Department of Mysteries hummed with the low, insistent thrum of restrained magic. Ron Weasley stood just behind the safety barrier, arms crossed, trying to look as though he knew what he was doing. Around him, robed officials murmured in hushed tones, their eyes fixed on the central dais where the hourglass hovered, not resting, not spinning, but suspended in mid-air by invisible threads of enchantment. It was smaller than he'd expected, no larger than a loaf of bread, its glass etched with spiraling runes that pulsed faintly blue. Sand drifted upward instead of down. Counter-temporal flow, someone said, adjusting their spectacles. It's not measuring time, it's holding it. Ron swallowed. He wasn't supposed to be nervous. This was supposed to be routine, a demonstration of the new chronal stabilization device, designed to isolate and contain unstable time fractures, the kind that had been cropping up near old magical battle sites. His role? Observe. Report. Stay out of the way. But something about the hourglass unsettled him. It didn't just glow, it pulsed like a heartbeat made of glass and light, and the air around it tasted wrong. Metallic, like licking a battery, with a faint aftertaste of burnt cinnamon. Hermione stepped forward, her wand out, eyes scanning the runes. She wore her ministry robes with a precision that still made Ron smile. Sleeves rolled exactly to the elbows, hair pinned back, but already escaping in wisps near her temples. The containment field is holding at 97%, she said, voice steady. But there's a fluctuation in the retrograde resonance. Did anyone verify the anchor ruse? A wizard in deep green robes waved a hand. All checked, Granger. Twice. She didn't look convinced. She never did when magic involved shortcuts. And the fail-safe? The temporal bleed-back protocol? Standard ministry procedure. Ron saw her jaw tighten. There's nothing standard about this. He stepped forward. Maybe we should slow down a bit. Hermione turned, startled, as if she'd forgotten he was there. Then her expression softened, just slightly, just for him. Wrong, you're right. We should. The lead researcher scoffed. We're on schedule. The minister expects results by noon. It's not about the schedule, Hermione said. It's about control. That hourglass isn't just containing time. It's consuming it. Can't you feel it? The air's thinner, like we're standing at the edge of a vacuum. Ron could. He'd been trying not to, but now that she named it, the sensation flooded back, a pressure behind his eyes, a whisper in his ears that wasn't quite sound, more like a memory of sound, half remembered. Then the hourglass flared, not bright, not blinding, but deep, a pulse that didn't travel through the air, but through time itself. Ron felt it in his bones, a sudden lurch, as if the world had skipped a beat. And then, silence. The hum was gone, the voices, the rustle of robes. Even the light seemed frozen. Ron looked around. Everyone was still, utterly still. A woman mid-sip, her teacup suspended. A quill hovering above parchment. Hermione, frozen mid-turn, one hand lifted, her mouth slightly open. And she blinked. And only she moved. Ron, she whispered, voice trembling. Can you see me? He stared. Hermione? What happened? I don't know. Her eyes darted around. But I think you're not supposed to be awake. Awake? What are you talking about? She stepped toward him, slow, deliberate. The loop, it reset. But you're still here, in your mind. You're remembering. I don't understand. She reached out, touched his arm, warm, real. Then listen carefully. We don't have long. The hourglass. It didn't contain time. It trapped it, and now it's trapping you. Every time it resets, the world goes back. But you stay. You keep the memories. Ron's breath caught. How do you know? Because I've seen this before, she said. In theory, a recursive temporal field. But I never thought, never hoped, it would let me reach you. He looked down, his watch. The hand spun wildly, then stopped. The numbers flickered, 12, 3, 6, and settled. 11:47, the same time as before. And then, like a tide returning, sound rushed back. Voices, movement, the hum. The hourglass glowed, steady. No one noticed anything had changed, except Hermione and Ron. He turned to her. She was already watching him, her eyes wide, searching. And in that moment, he realized. She knew. She remembered. Not the loop, but him. The clock above the Ministry's Department of Mysteries ticked with a sound heavier than it should have. Each second, like a stone dropped into still water. Ron Weasley blinked, his fingers brushing the cool brass of the containment chamber's handle. Inside, a delicate hourglass spun counterclockwise, its sand a shimmering silver blue, suspended in mid-air, as if breathing. "It's stabilizing," Hermione said beside him, her voice tight with focus. Her bushy hair was pinned back, but a few strands had escaped, clinging to her temple with sweat. "Just a few more adjustments, and we can initiate the temporal lock." Ron nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what a temporal lock entailed. He was there because Kingsley had asked. Someone trustworthy. Someone who wouldn't panic. He wasn't sure he qualified. But Hermione was here, and that made it feel less like he was out of his depth. "Stand clear," she said, pressing her wand to the base of the device. The initiating sequence in 3, 2, the air thickened. The air thickened. Light bent, Ron's ears popped as if he'd apparated underwater. The hourglass flared, its sand reversing violently, then nothing, silence. Then a soft chime like a bell struck once beneath a lake. Ron turned to Hermione. "Did it work?" She frowned at the readout, a small parchment strip unfurling from the machine's side. "It's not showing any anomalies, but the energy signature just vanished." "That's not possible." He stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. "Maybe it's over. We can go grab a drink, yeah? I fancy a butterbeer, or honestly a fire whiskey. After this, I've earned it." She gave him a tired smile. "You always say that after near-catastrophic magical events. Because they always happen right before I earn a drink." She laughed, soft, brief, perfect, and something in his chest tightened. He noticed then how the dim light caught the gold in her eyes, how her lower lip was slightly chapped, how she tucked her wand behind her ear like a pencil, things he'd seen 1,000 times but never really seen. Then the lights flickered. The hourglass lit up again, not with the controlled glow of calibration, but with a pulse, deep and hungry. Ron staggered as the floor shuddered. Hermione reached for him, her fingers brushing his wrist. And then he was back at the beginning. The clock ticked. The brass handle was cool under his fingers. The hourglass spun counterclockwise, silver blue sand suspended. Ron blinked. "What are you looking at?" Hermione asked, not unkindly, already scanning the device. His mouth opened, closed. Didn't we already do this?" She turned, brow furrowed. "Do what?" The machine flared. The lights went out. "You were about to say something, about the readout." Her expression softened into concern. "Ron, the sequence hasn't even started. We're just about to initiate. Are you feeling all right?" He looked around. Everything was the same. The same dim glow of enchanted bulbs. The same hum of unseen machinery. The same chipped mug on the desk with "World's Best Witch" written in crooked letters. He'd bought it as a joke last Christmas. "No," he said slowly. "No, I don't think I am." But before he could explain, she was already counting down. Initiating sequence in 3, 2, 1. The air thickened. His ears popped, and again, light bent, silence fell, and the world reset. He gasped as he found himself back at the handle, heart hammering. Hermione stood beside him, repeating the same words, the same movements, like a record stuck on a groove. It happened a third time, a fourth. Each cycle, he tried something different. He grabbed her wrist before she could start. He shouted. He dove for the machine. But no matter what he did, the chime came, soft, inevitable, and then he was back. By the 12th loop, he stopped trying to stop it. Instead, he watched her. He noticed how she bit her lip when concentrating. How she tapped her foot when nervous. How, in the split second before the chime, she always looked at him, just for a heartbeat, like she was memorizing his face. And he wondered, not for the first time, if she'd ever looked at him like that before. Really looked. The loops kept turning. And Ron, alone in time, began to see her, truly see her, for the first time. The great hall shimmered under the enchanted ceiling, a tapestry of twilight streaked with violet and gold. Ron Weasley chewed slowly on a mouthful of shepherd's pie, his eyes drifting across the Gryffindor table. Hermione sat beside him, her nose buried in advanced arithmancy and temporal theory, parchment scattered like fallen leaves around her plate. Harry was miming something about Quidditch with his fork, probably reenacting the Wronski feint for the third time that evening. Ron swallowed. You know, if you keep poking people with that, McGonagall's going to transfigure it into a toothpick. Harry grinned. Then she'd have to admit, I've got style. Hermione didn't look up. You'll poke your own eye out, Harry. And Ron, you've got peas on your tie. Ron glanced down. Sure enough, 3 green spheres clung to the red and gold fabric like stubborn stars. He brushed them off with a sigh. Blimey, it's like they're conspiring against me. The conversation flowed, predictable, familiar, comforting. Neville asked about herbology homework. Seamus told a joke about a confused Thestral. Ron laughed, mid-bite, and nearly choked when Ginny flicked a bread roll at his head. Pay attention, she said. He wiped his mouth. I was paying attention. Then the lights flickered. Not dramatically, just a slight dimming, as if the candles had exhaled. The enchanted ceiling pulsed, shadows curling at the edges, like bird paper. Ron froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Something shifted, not in the room but behind his ribs. A pressure, sudden and cold, as though time had hiccuped, and then nothing. The lights were normal. The ceiling glowed steady. Ginny was still smirking at him. Harry was saying the exact same thing about the Wronski feint, his fork carving the same arc through the air. Ron blinked. Wait, didn't you just say that? Harry frowned. Say what? That thing about the fake dive. You just said it. No, I didn't, Harry said, laughing. I'm just saying it now. Ron turned to Hermione. Didn't you just tell me about the peas? She looked up, brow furrowed. Ron, you still have peas on your tie. He stared. There they were, 3 little green dots, clinging to the fabric, exactly where they'd been before. His stomach dropped. No, I die. He reached up, brushing them off. I already brushed them off. Hermione's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with that particular kind of focus she reserved for unsolved equations. Ron, you've barely touched your food. Your tie was clean a moment ago. But it wasn't, he insisted, voice rising. I did brush them off. You said that. You said I had peas. I brushed them. Then the lights. The lights didn't do anything, Seamus interrupted. They flickered. No, they didn't, Ginny said, leaning forward. You're mental. Ron looked around. Everyone was watching him now. But their expressions weren't concerned. They were rehearsed. Neville's mouth opened to ask about herbology again. Ron cut him off. Don't ask about the essay. You're going to ask about the essay, and then Seamus is going to make a joke about mandrakes. And then, Seamus blinked. Mandrakes are funny, though, when they scream. Ron's breath came short. He turned to Hermione. Her eyes had changed, not in color but in depth, like she'd just noticed something vital in a spell diagram she'd seen 100 times. Something's wrong, he whispered. She closed her book slowly. Tell me what you saw. The lights. They dimmed, and then everyone started over, like a record skipping. Hermione studied him, not dismissively, not impatiently. She was listening. Did it feel cold, in your chest? He nodded, throat tight. She leaned closer. Ron, did it happen before this? He hesitated. No, this was the first. And then the lights flickered again. The pressure returned, deeper this time, a vice around his ribs. The world blurred, just for a heartbeat, and snapped back. He was holding his fork. Harry was saying, then she'd have to admit I've got style. Ron's hands trembled. He looked at Hermione. She hadn't looked up yet. The peas were back on his tie. Neville's mouth began to open, but this time Ron didn't wait. He dropped his fork and grabbed Hermione's wrist. Her head snapped up. Ron, I need you, he said, voice raw. Something's happening. I can't stop it. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time, she didn't look like she was solving a problem. She looked afraid. The air in the Ministry's Department of Mysteries tasted stale, thick with the ozone hum of unsupervised enchantments. Hermione Granger stood over a cluttered obsidian table, fingers smudging ink across parchment, as she cross-referenced spectral readouts from the 7th Veil chamber. The reports came in fragments, distorted, half-formed, like voices shouting through stone. Temporal flux at .004. chronometric drift uncontained, recurrent entropy echo. Each line pulsed with a faint blue shimmer, the script recoiling slightly from her touch, as if the very ink feared what it recorded. She adjusted her glasses, pushing a loose curl behind her ear with the back of her hand. It had been 3 days, 72 hours since Ron's last clear transmission. Not that time meant anything now. Not when one man was trapped inside a single, repeating hour, folding back on itself like a Mobius strip, woven from time and desperation. A cold draft slithered through the chamber, though no door had opened. The candles along the arched wall flickered once, twice, then burned unnaturally still. Hermione glanced up. The temporal hourglass, suspended in a cage of silver chains, pulsed like a dying star. Sand streamed upward. No, that wasn't right. She stepped forward, heart thudding. The hourglass wasn't just malfunctioning, it was remembering. Grains of enchanted silica ascended in reverse, caught in a loop of their own. And in that moment she saw it. The anomaly wasn't external. It was anchored. Someone was inside, cycling through the same 60 minutes, over and over, their consciousness the tether holding the fracture together. Ron. She whispered his name, her breath forming a pale wisp in the frigid air. It's not just a loop, it's you. Her eyes darted to the latest report. A chronospectral imprint had surfaced from the containment field's residual echo. She incanted a reveling charm, wand tracing figure eights above the parchment. Ink blued into a faint, shimmering silhouette. A man pacing, rumming hands through his hair, looking up at an unseen point. Then repeating. Always the same gestures. The same turn at 37 seconds. The same wordless shout at 59. And then reset. Her stomach clenched. He was aware. He had to be. Only a conscious mind could imprint so strongly on linear time. She pulled out her own enchanted timepiece, the one she'd modified after the department's warning. The hands spun wildly, then stilled. The display read, Cycle 1847. Her breath caught. He had lived the same hour over 1,000 times. She thought of him, Ron, trapped in that sterile chamber, the world blinking out, and reforming around him, every time believing he'd finally broken free, only to find himself back at the start. Did he see her each time? Did he hear her voice, faint and distant, like a dream slipping away? Or was he alone, screaming into silence? Her fingers trembled as she tapped the surface of the hourglass. A tiny crack ran along its base, barely visible, but magic seeped from it, a thin, golden thread, warm to the touch. She leaned closer. The thread pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. And then, impossibly, she felt it. A whisper against her mind. Hermione. Not spoken, not written, just there, like a memory she hadn't made yet. She froze. Another pulse. Fainter this time. But beneath it, something else. Not panic. Not despair. Hope. Tears blurred her vision. He was reaching through. Across time. Across the fracture. He was trying to reach her. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. I'm here, Ron, she whispered. I'm not letting go. Outside, the ministry bells rang, once, sharply, marking the hour. But here, in the stillness, time had already begun to bend. The clock on the ministry wall ticked towards 11:17, and Ron exhaled, low and controlled. He had done this before. So many times the number blurred into meaninglessness. But this time, he wasn't just waiting. This time, he would test it. He stood from the chair, the scrape of wood on stone, echoing too sharply in the empty room. The aurora of blue light still pulsed faintly around the fractured time restraint device in the center of the chamber. Its glass casing cracked like a spider web. He had memorized every crack, every flicker. He had watched it reset 100 times. Today he didn't go to Hermione. Instead, he walked to the far wall where a dusty potted plant, some ministry-approved foliage that never quite thrived, sat on the ledge. He picked it up, turned it upside down, and dumped the soil onto the floor in a slow, deliberate cascade. Dirt scattered like dark sand, spilling across the tiles, roots, exposed and trembling. He placed the empty pot, upside down beside it. Then he sat back in the chair and waited. 11:18. The light flared. The air hummed, thick with static. His skull buzzed, and for a heartbeat, the world stuttered, like a record skipping. Then silence. The room was pristine. The plant stood upright, healthy, untouched. The soil was back inside. The pot was right side up. Ron exhaled through his nose. Expected, but still, he had hoped. He stood again, pulse steady now, methodical. Second test. This time he walked to the desk, where Hermione usually sat, quill in hand, parchment scattered with equations. No one else could follow. He picked up her favorite quill, the eagle feather, one she'd bought in Diagon Alley the summer after 6th year, and snapped it in two. The sound was loud, brittle. He dropped the pieces into his pocket. Back in the chair. 11:18. The flare, the hum, the skip. And then, she was there. "Ron," Hermione said, her voice tight with concern. "You're pale. Did something happen?" He looked at her. Really looked. The way her hair curled just behind her ears when she'd been hunched over books for hours. The faint smudge of ink on her right thumb. The way her lower lip always pressed forward slightly when she was trying not to panic. No, she hadn't noticed the quill yet. "Nothing," he said. "Just thinking." She frowned but turned back to her notes. "I've isolated the temporal decay to a 12-minute oscillation. If we can stabilize the negative feedback loop." Ron reached into his pocket, pulled out the broken quill. Her eyes snapped to it. That's mine. I broke it," he said. "Before, in the last loop." Her breath caught. "You kept it. I wanted to see if it would come back with me." She stared at the fragments, then at him. "Ron, that's impossible. The loop resets everything. Everything. Not me," he said quietly. "Not what I carry." She stood, trembling slightly. "Then you're remembering more, not just impressions. Tangible proof." He nodded. For the first time, a flicker of something like hope crossed her face. Then fear. If you can retain objects, what else can you change? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the door, something he'd never done before. It was always locked, always sealed by ministry enchantments. But today, he turned the knob. It opened. Hermione gasped. That door hasn't opened in weeks. Not since the containment breach. Ron stepped into the corridor. Empty, lit by flickering torches. The same corridor he'd seen 100 times. But now it felt different. Real. Unscripted. He took 3 steps forward. Then, 11:18. The world collapsed in on itself. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the chair. The plant was whole. The quill was back on the desk, unbroken. Hermione was scribbling furiously. Unaware, but in his pocket, something pressed against his thigh. He reached in, a single withered leaf. From the plant, his breath trembled. He had changed something. And the loop hadn't fixed it all. Rain tapped against the windows of Hermione's study in a rhythm that felt too deliberate, like the universe itself was counting down. Scrolls lay scattered across the wooden desk, ink smudged from her restless fingers. Her lamp flickered, casting long shadows that danced over equations written in looping Aramaic and temporal runes she hadn't touched since her post-Well research. Ron's voice echoed in her memory. No, not memory. She'd heard it just minutes ago, though the clock insisted it was the same hour. Again, she rubbed her temples, breath shallow. "It's not random," she whispered, more to the silence than to anyone. "There's a pattern. There has to be." Her quill hovered over a diagram of fluctuating chronometric waves, energy signatures recorded during the Ministry's failed containment trial. Each spike aligned perfectly with the moment Ron vanished, only to reappear exactly 60 minutes later, unaware. Except he wasn't unaware anymore. In the last 3 cycles he had looked at her with a kind of quiet dread, as if he knew before she spoke that she would say, "Let me try again." Hermione straightened, eyes narrowing on a fragment sketched at the bottom of the page, a shard of obsidian, veined with gold, recovered from the ruins beneath the Department of Mysteries. It resembled a time-turner, but older, far older, the kind of artifact mentioned only in forbidden texts, ones that spoke of time not as a river, but as a spiral. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside lay the fragment, cool to the touch, humming faintly when held close to her ear. It had been confiscated after the accident, deemed inert, but she'd felt it pulse the moment Ron collapsed. She placed it beside the latest energy reading. The waveform on the parchment shimmered, reacting. A resonance, subtle, but undeniable. "No," she breathed. It's not just residual magic, it's a key. Outside, thunder rolled. The lights dimmed. She didn't flinch. Her mind raced through ancient Sumerian incantations, Babylonian star charts, the lost theories of hermetic time-binders. If time wasn't being broken, what if it was being repaired? Over and over, as if the fragment were trying to correct an error. She thought of Ron, his hands gripping the edge of her desk, his voice cracking as he whispered, "I've said this before, haven't I? I've seen your face like this." Cycle after cycle, he remembered more. The loop wasn't just trapping him. It was teaching him, and her. She dipped her quill and began to write. Faster now. Hypothesis: the fragment does not create the loop, but responds to emotional resonance within a fixed temporal radius. The stronger the connection between anchor and subject, the tighter the cycle binds. She paused. Anchor. Her. She was the anchor. Not the ministry equipment, not the spell work. It was her. Every time she reached for him, every time she promised, "I'll fix this," she was feeding the loop. Her love, her fear, her refusal to let go, it was the fuel. Tears blurred the ink. Ron, a knock at the door. Soft, familiar. She didn't need to look to know it was him. The timing was always the same. 17 seconds after the thunder, she wiped her eyes. "Come in." The door opened. Ron stood there, drenched from the rain, hair plastered to his forehead. His blue eyes searched hers, weary and knowing. "You found something," he said, not a question. She nodded, voice barely above a whisper. I think I know why you can't leave." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor. "Then tell me, Hermione, because I can't keep doing this. I remember everything now, every time you cry, every time you almost give up." She stood, trembling. "What if the only way to stop it is to stop trying to save you?" He looked at her, really looked. Not as the girl who always had the answer, but as the woman who'd held his hand through wars and winters, who had loved him even when he didn't notice. "I don't want to be saved," he said slowly. "I want to be seen." And in that moment, the hourglass buried beneath the ministry sands shifted, just once. A grain of time fell where none had fallen before. The silence wasn't silent anymore. Ron stood in the middle of the ministry corridor, the same stretch of peeling blue paint and flickering torch sconces he'd seen 100 times, or 1,000. He wasn't sure anymore. His breath came slow, measured, because he'd learned that panic only made the hourglass heavier. But now, beneath the hum of distant enchantments and the occasional echo of footsteps that never quite reached him, there was something else. A tick, soft, deliberate, like a fingernail, tapping glass. He turned, slowly scanning the empty hall. No clock in sight. The ministry's timepieces had all been shattered during the containment breach. Shattered or frozen. Yet the sound remained. Tick. A pause, then another. Tick. "Hermione?" he called, though he already knew she wasn't there. Not yet. She never arrived until exactly 17 seconds after the loop reset. He'd counted every time. No answer. Just the tick, steady as a heartbeat. Ron pressed his fingers against the stone wall, cold, rough, real. He closed his eyes and focused on the sound. It wasn't coming from the corridor. It wasn't even outside. It was inside his head. He opened his eyes. The torchlight dimmed, just slightly, as if the air itself had drawn breath. A chill ran down his spine, not from fear exactly. Fear had become a dull companion, but from recognition. This was new. This hadn't happened before. He stepped forward. 1 pace, 2. The ticking grew louder, not in volume, but in presence, as if it had always been there, waiting for him to listen. Tick, 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 tick. He reached the junction where the hall split toward research and development. That's where she'd come from, every time. Right on schedule. Hair slightly frayed from stress, robes dusted with ash from ruined scrolls, eyes wide with that familiar mix of hope and dread. But this time, he wasn't waiting for her. This time, he was listening. The ticking pulsed in time with his steps. Left foot tick, right foot tick. His breath hitched. It wasn't just a sound. It was a rhythm, a pattern, like a spell, half remembered, like a lullaby from childhood he could almost place. A whisper of fabric. He turned. Hermione stood at the end of the hall, exactly where she always appeared. Her lips parted. "Ron." He held up a hand. "Wait." She froze, brow furrowing. "What is it?" Did something change? Yes, he said. I can hear it. Hear what? The clock. She stepped forward, cautious. There is no clock, Ron. You know that. The temporal wards. I know, he interrupted, voice low. But I hear it anyway. It's inside me, like it's been wound into my bones. Hermione's expression shifted. Concern, calculation, then a flicker of something like wonder. She reached into her robes and pulled out a small, cracked hourglass suspended on a silver chain. The sand inside swirled, sluggish, as if drowning. This is the anchor, she said, the source of the loop. But it's not ticking. It's silent. Ron looked at it. The sand fell grain by grain, but there was no sound. And yet tick, the rhythm in his head matched the fall of the sand. It's you, she said to me. It's tied to you. What? The loop, the sound. It's not just me repeating. It's you trying to reach me. Every time you say my name, you touch the glass. You whisper the incantation. But it's not working. So the magic, it's echoing. In me. Hermione's hands trembled. You're remembering more. Not remembering, he corrected. Noticing. He took a step toward her. Then another, until he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the faint smudge of ink on her wrist, the way her lower lip quivered when she tried not to cry. I never saw you before, he whispered. Not really. The ticking softened, just for a moment. Slowed, as if holding its breath, and then for the first time it skipped. The air tasted stale again. That was the first thing he noticed. The dry, metallic tang at the back of his throat, like old coins and burnt wires. Ron blinked up at the ministry's sterile white ceiling, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead in that same uneven rhythm. One long pulse, too short, tick-tock, pause. He knew it by heart now, knew everything by heart. He sat up too fast, the movement jerking his spine straight, and immediately regretted it. The world swam, edges blurred, colors smearing like wet paint. He squeezed his eyes shut, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. When he opened them again, the room was solid. The clock above the door read 4:17 p.m. The loop had reset. Again. He didn't check the mirror this time. He already knew what he'd see. Pale face, shadows like bruises under his eyes, red hair matted on one side from sleeping on the cot. He'd stopped shaving 3 loops ago. Or was it 8? He couldn't remember. The numbers slipped through his fingers like sand. Ron reached beneath the thin mattress and pulled out a crumpled stack of parchment, bound with a rubber band that had long since lost its spring. He flipped to the next blank page. Day? Loop pound? Can't keep track. He wrote in shaky script, letters slanting downward. Hermione came. Same words. Same clothes. Blue jumper. Faint lavender smell. She touched my hand. Cold fingers. Reassuring. Or trying to be. He paused, pen hovering. Was it lavender this time? Or had it been rosemary yesterday? Or the day before? Or the time before that? He rubbed his temples. The pressure built behind his eyes. A dull throb that never quite faded. It was worse now. Each reset carved a little deeper into his mind, like water over stone. He could feel the cracks forming. A knock at the door. His breath hitched. Come in. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Hermione, her brown hair pulled back in a messy knot, a few loose curls framing her face. Blue jumper. Yes, lavender. He was sure of it. She carried a clipboard, a thermos, and that look, the one that hovered between hope and exhaustion. Ron, she said softly, how are you feeling? He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he swallowed and said, like I've said this 100 times. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. It hasn't been that long, only 27 hours. He looked at her, really looked. The faint line between her brows, the way her lower lip trembled just slightly when she lied. You told me that yesterday, he said, and the day before, and the day before that. Her face fell. Ron, please, we're close. The team's recalibrating the resonance dampeners. If we can just stabilize the field. I've heard it all, he whispered. You don't remember, but I do, every word, every gesture. You always pause before saying, I believe in you, Like it costs you something. She froze. He watched the color drain from her face. You've never said that before, she breathed. Not in any of the other cycles. Ron's hands began to shake. He stared at the parchment in front of him. The ink was still wet. He hadn't written that last part. Had he? No, he said. More to himself. I didn't write it. I didn't. But he had. He must have. Or maybe the loop was changing. Maybe he was changing. Hermione took a step forward. Then another. She dropped the clipboard. It clattered to the floor. Ron, what did you just remember? He looked up at her. Really looked. And for the first time in countless repetitions, he saw something new. Not in her, but in himself. The fear was still there. The exhaustion. But beneath it, something else. A spark. A question. What if, he said slowly. I'm not supposed to break the loop. She knelt beside him, her hand finding his. Warm now. Not cold. What if, he continued, the loop breaks me, so I can become someone who doesn't need to break it. Silence stretched between them, thin and fragile. Outside, the clock ticked. The lights flickered, and somewhere, deep in the ministry's core, the hourglass turned. Just once, backward. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the windows of the ministry's Department of Mysteries. A dull percussion beneath the hum of enchanted instruments. Hermione Granger stood over a mahogany table cluttered with scrolls, shattered glass, and a single, unbroken hourglass, its sands suspended mid-full, glowing faintly gold. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her spectacles, rereading the same line for the 12th time. It's not a loop, she whispered, more to herself than to the empty room. It's a resonance. Ron sat across from her, slumped in a chair, eyes distant. His voice, when it came, was hollow. I've had this exact conversation 7 times now. You say the same thing. I nod. The clock hits 3. And poof, I'm back at the beginning. Like I'm stuck in a bloody record that won't change tracks. She turned to him, searching his face for something. Recognition, clarity, anything. But you remember each time. That's the key. Most time loops erase memory. This one doesn't. It keeps yours. It feeds on it. He rubbed his temples. Brilliant. So I'm not just trapped. I'm the battery. No. She leaned forward, voice urgent. You're the anchor. The hourglass isn't just repeating time. It's repeating you. Your magic. Your thoughts. The moment it malfunctioned, your signature was imprinted into the cycle. Like a fingerprint burned into glass. Every reset pulls from you, Ron. That's why you remember. That's why you're fraying. He looked up slowly. Fraying. Hermione hesitated. She hadn't wanted to say it aloud. You're forgetting things. Small things. Last cycle you didn't remember how we met. The one before, you called Harry James for nearly 10 minutes. Your mind is being worn down by the repetition. The loop is stable, because you're holding it together. But every time it resets, a piece of you stays behind. Ron exhaled sharply, staring at his hands. So I'm the glue. And when I fall apart, the whole thing collapses? Or we find a way to break it before that happens? She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I think the loop isn't just bound to time. It's bound to your emotions, your regrets. That's why it always starts the same, right before I tell you I might leave for research in Albania. That moment it's charged. You've always been afraid I'd choose knowledge over people, over you. Ron's jaw tightened. That's mental. You really think my insecurities are powering a time-eating hourglass? Magic doesn't run on logic, Ron. It runs on meaning. On connection. She pulled a small vial from her robes, clear liquid swirling with silver threads. I've extracted a resonance echo from the hourglass. It's a fragment of the loop's core. If I can isolate your magical signature from it, we might be able to disrupt the cycle. But I'll need you to focus, to choose something different in the next loop. He met her eyes. Like what? Don't wait for me to speak first. Say what you've never said in any of the cycles before. Mean it. The loop thrives on repetition, on predictability. If you break the pattern, even slightly, it might destabilize. Ron looked away, voice quieter. And if I say the wrong thing, or nothing at all, then it resets again, and again, until there's nothing left of you to remember me at all. The air grew thick. The clock on the wall ticked toward 3. Hermione stood, clutching the vial like a lifeline. Ron, I don't want to go to Albania. I was going to say that today. I was going to tell you I'd rather stay. With you. He froze. This was new. Not in the words, maybe, but in the timing. In the wake behind them. The sand in the hourglass trembled. 3 o'clock chimed. And for the first time, Ron smiled before the world dissolved. The cup trembled in his hand. Not from the heat, though the ceramic burned his palm, but from the weight of what he was about to do. This time, he wouldn't let it fall. He could already smell the coffee. Dark, bitter, with just a splash of milk the way Hermione always took it. The steam curled toward the ceiling in lazy spirals, vanishing into the dim light of the Ministry's forgotten sublevel. The same light flickered above, humming like a dying insect. Same hum, same stain on the carpet, same loose floor tile beneath his heel. He'd counted the cracks in the wall. 47. He'd memorized the rhythm of Hermione's footsteps as she paced, the way her brow furrowed when she muttered equations under her breath. He knew exactly when she'd turn, when she'd say, "Ron, please, just stand still," and he'd drop the cup. Again. But not today. Today he tightened his grip. She looked up from her notes, quill, hovering mid-sentence. "Ron? I'm not dropping it," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "You're... what?" "The cup. I'm not letting it fall," Hermione blinked. "That's not the problem, Ron. The spill doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he snapped, then softened. "It matters because it's the same. Every time you say that I move, it slips. Coffee hits the floor. The lights flicker, and then..." He swallowed. "Then I'm back at the beginning. Same hallway. Same coffee. Same you." She studied him, really studied him, like she was reading the lines on his face, instead of his words. "You remember it all, don't you? All of it," he whispered. "The way your sleeve catches on the desk when you reach for your wand. The way you say my name when you try not to cry. I've heard it, I don't know how many times. Dozens. Hundreds." Her breath hitched. "I didn't know it was this bad. It's worse." He stepped forward, careful not to shift his weight too fast. "I used to think if I just did something different, it would break. So I tried. I threw the cup before it spilled. I didn't pick it up at all. I ran, but it always ends the same. The loop resets before it hits the floor. Time folds back, like it's afraid of the mess." Hermione's fingers curled around her wand. The temporal anchor, it's keyed to disruption. A spill, a shout, a sudden movement. The Ministry designed it to contain anomalies by resetting at the first sign of instability. "So the coffee? It's a trigger?" "Not the coffee," she said slowly. "The surprise of it. The loss of control. The leap feeds on chaos. And the spill is just a symptom." Ron looked down at the cup. Steam still rose. The liquid trembled, but didn't spill. His arm ached from holding it so still. "Then what if there's no surprise?" he asked. "What if I choose to spill it?" She froze. "You can't." "I can. I'm not letting it fall by accident this time. I'm doing it on purpose. If the loop resets on chaos, maybe intention breaks it. Ron, you don't know what will happen. I know I can't keep living the same hour over and over, watching you try to save me while I forget how to breathe on my own." He met her eyes. "I love you, Hermione, and I'm so tired of loving you in fragments." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't look away. He turned the cup slowly, poured the coffee onto the floor in a steady, silent stream. Brown liquid spread across the worn tile, soaking into the old stain. No gasp, no shout, no panic. Just stillness. The lights flickered, but this time they didn't reset. The hum deepened. The air thickened, pressing against his skin like wet cloth. The cracks in the wall pulsed faintly, glowing blue at the edges, and the coffee kept spreading. Hermione stepped forward, not to stop it, but to take his hand. "It's working," she whispered. Ron didn't dare move. "Or it's breaking." But for the first time in countless hours, time didn't rewind. It moved forward. The air in the Ministry's Department of Mysteries hummed with the low metallic thrum of breached containment, a sound like a clock ticking backward through molten lead. Ron stood frozen in the center of the Chronos chamber, arms outstretched as if bracing against an invisible tide. The hourglass above him spun wildly, its sands no longer falling but coiling like serpents in midair, suspended between seconds. Again, always again. He knew what came next, the shimmer in the corner of his vision, the soft footfall, the door creaking open, and then, Hermione stepped through, breathless, her hair wild with static, robes singed at the hem. She clutched a charred notebook to her chest like a shield. "Ron," she said, voice frayed but steady. "I think I've found something." He wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. How many times had she said that? A dozen? 100? Each loop began the same. Her arrival, her hope, her slow collapse when he recited her words before she spoke them. But this time, something was different. Her fingers trembled as she uncurled a scrap of parchment from the notebook's spine. It glowed faintly, etched with a single rune, Othala, the mark of inheritance, of passed-down knowledge. "I layered it with temporal shielding," she whispered, "and bound it to your magical signature. I don't know if it will hold through the reset, but I had to try." Ron stared at the parchment. It didn't burn. It didn't vanish. It just waited. "You've said that before," he said, voice raw. "But this time I didn't tell you I found a flaw in the containment runes," she interrupted. "I didn't say the loop pulses at precisely 12-second intervals. I didn't mention the way your left hand twitches when the sand reverses." His breath caught. She smiled, small and fragile. "Because you've never told me that before. Not in any of the other loops." He looked down. His left hand trembled, just once, like a whisper from a forgotten life. The rune pulsed. "I've been trying to break the spell," she said. "But what if I've been trying to reach you instead? What if the loop isn't just a trap? It's a message? A test?" Ron swallowed. "And if it is, then maybe it's not about fixing time," she said, stepping closer. "Maybe it's about fixing us." The air crackled. The hourglass shuddered. The world flickered at the edges, ready to fold back into itself. But the runes stayed. Ron reached out, not for the parchment, but for her hand. Warm, real, anchored. "I've watched you die," he said quietly. "Over and over. Sometimes the chamber collapses. Sometimes the magic consumes you. Once, you just stopped coming. I waited and waited. And the loop kept turning, but you were gone." Her eyes glistened. "I'm here now." "You're always here," he said. "But I never saw you. Not really. The way you bite your lip when you're scared. The way you say my name, like it's a promise. I didn't notice. Not until I had to live the same hour 1,000 times just to hear it again." She squeezed his hand. "Then maybe that's the key. Not science, not spells, just this." The rune flared, bright, golden, searing. And for the first time the hourglass stuttered, not reset. Paused. Ron could feel it. The weight of 1,000 loops pressing against a single moment, trembling on the edge of change. Hermione's voice was barely a breath. "Don't let go." He didn't. The corridor outside the Department of Mysteries was always cold, but this time it was different. Ron felt it in his bones, not the usual chill of stone and silence, but a deeper, heavier cold, like time itself had gone stale. He'd lost count of how many times he'd walked this stretch of flagstone, passed the same flickering torch, heard the distant drip of water from a cracked pipe. 10? 100? More? The numbers blurred into a dull ache behind his eyes. Each hour began the same. The quiet hum beneath the floor, the sudden lurch in his chest, and then, back at the start, the world reset. He didn't. He leaned against the wall, pressing his palm to the damp stone. His breath came slow, measured. He'd stopped shouting, stopped running. Screaming didn't change anything. Neither did banging on the sealed door at the end of the hall, the one that always stayed, locked until exactly 3 minutes, and 47 seconds before the loop reset. He'd timed it. He'd timed everything. But today, this cycle, something was different. A scrap of parchment lay at his feet, caught in the draft that shouldn't exist. It hadn't been there a moment ago. He was certain. He'd memorized every crack, every stain, every loose tile. This was new. Ron crouched, fingers trembling as he picked it up. The paper was warm, not from his hand, from before, as if it had just been written. Ron, it read in familiar looping script. "I know you can't hear me. Not yet. But I'm here. I'm trying. Hold on. Just a little longer. I'm so close." It was Hermione's handwriting, no doubt. He'd seen it 1,000 times. On essays in margins, scribbled on napkins during late-night study sessions. The slant of the R, the way she dotted her, is with perfect little circles. This was hers. His breath caught. He turned the note over. Nothing on the back. Just those few lines, ink slightly smudged, like she'd written in haste, or in tears. "Hermione?" he whispered, voice cracking. He looked down the hall. Empty. The torch sputtered. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, almost like a pulse. She didn't know he could remember. Not really. Not at first. Early loops he'd panic, disoriented, thinking he'd blacked out. But now he could feel the seams of the hour, frayed and thin. And if she would writing to him, if she'd found a way to slip something into the loop. He clutched the note to his chest. His heart pounded, not from fear but from something sharper. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. The last time he'd seen her, outside the loop, or what he assumed was outside, she'd been pale, eyes shadowed, hair wild from too many sleepless nights, standing behind the observation glass, mouthing words he couldn't hear. He'd seen her tap her temple once, then point at him. "Remember," she'd mouthed, "remember me." And he had. He'd remembered everything. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The exact shade of her eyes when she was angry. Dark brown, almost gold. The way she said his name when she was trying not to cry. This note, it meant she was breaking through. The hum rose to a whine. The air thickened. He had minutes, maybe less, before the loop reset, before the world folded back on itself and erased everything. Ron looked around frantically. The note. It had to stay. If it vanished with the rest, she'd think it hadn't worked. She'd stop trying. He tore a strip from his sleeve, rough wool, and wrapped it around the parchment, knotting it tight. Then he slipped it into the crack between two stones near the base of the wall, a place he'd checked 100 times, empty until now. "There," he whispered. "I see you, Hermione. I'm still here." The torch went out. The floor trembled, and the world blinked, white, silent, gone. Then Ron stood in the corridor. Cold, stone, torch flickering. His hand flew to his chest. Empty. But he remembered the note. He remembered her. He dropped to his knees, fingers scraping at the crack in the wall. And there it was, slightly warmer than the stone, still tied with the strip of his sleeve. The loop had reset. The note had not. The corridor outside the Department of Mysteries was always cold. Stone walls sweating with damp torchlight flickering like dying stars, but Ron had stopped shivering. He didn't need to now. He'd lived this hour 817 times. Or was it 818? The number blurred, slipping through his mind like sand. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the archway at the end. It would open in 32 seconds. He counted each breath, slow, deliberate, as if timing could anger him. The door creaked. Hermione stepped through, robes flapping slightly, a stack of parchment in one hand, her brow furrowed. "Ron, you're early." "I was waiting," he said, voice steady. He'd tried shouting once. He'd tried silence. He'd even tried laughing, wild, broken laughter that made her eyes widen in fear. This time he smiled. Small, reassuring. Just enough. She paused, studying him. "Are you all right? You look different." "I've been thinking," he said. That was new. He hadn't said that before. About the containment field. What if it's not a loop of time, but a loop of perception? What if it's not the world repeating, but just me? Hermione lowered the papers. "That's actually not what we've been considering." "I know," Ron said. "But what if I'm not stuck in time? What if time's stuck on me?" Her fingers tapped the parchment. "That would mean your consciousness is the anchor point. The Ministry's temporal sensors would have detected that, unless—" She stopped, eyes narrowing. "Unless the loop is masking its origin, like a heartbeat buried under static." "Yes," Ron whispered. "Like that." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment something shifted. Not in the world, in her. A softening, at the corners of her eyes, a breath caught mid-inhale. He'd seen this moment before, but never like this. Never with her seeing him back. "How do you know that phrase?" she asked. "Heartbeat under static." He froze. He hadn't meant to say it. It was something she'd muttered in the 3rd week of research, scribbling in a notebook he wasn't supposed to read. He wasn't supposed to remember. "I overheard you," he lied. She didn't believe him. He could see it, the flicker of doubt, the scientist in her warring with the friend. "Ron, I need you to tell me the truth. Have you been aware each time?" He exhaled. "Another first." "Yes." Her face paled. "How long?" "Since the beginning. The first loop. I've tried everything. Running, staying silent, telling you outright. You either don't believe me, or the loop resets before you can act." Hermione stepped closer, dropping the papers to the floor. "Oh, Ron." He flinched. That tone, soft, aching, had never been for him before. "Not like this." "Don't," he said. "Don't pity me. I don't want that." "It's not pity," she said, voice low. "It's horror. That you've been alone in this, reliving the same hour, watching me walk through the same motions, saying the same things, and hearing yours," he interrupted. "I know when you're going to sigh. I know the exact second you'll push your hair behind your ear. I know you always wear your left shoe a little looser because it pinches." She blinked. "You notice that?" "I notice everything now," he said, "because it's all I have." Silence stretched, fragile as glass. Somewhere down the hall a clock ticked, though there were no clocks here. Or maybe there were, and he'd simply never heard them before. Hermione reached out, hesitated, then touched his hand. Her fingers were warm, real. "We're going to fix this," she said. "But you have to trust me. And you have to let me in. Not just your thoughts, your fear, your exhaustion. Let me carry some of it." He looked down at their hands. He dreamed of this, her touch, her voice, her certainty, but never when he was awake. Never when it mattered. "I'm so tired, Hermione," he whispered. "I keep thinking I'll forget my own name, that I'll wake up and not know why I'm standing here. Not know you." "You won't," she said firmly. "I won't let you." And for the first time in hundreds of loops, Ron felt something shift, not in time, but in himself. As if the loop wasn't just eroding him, it was revealing him. Peeling back the layers of bravado, the jokes, the silence, until only truth remained. "I've loved you," he said, quiet. "In every one of these hours. I just never knew how to say it until now." Her breath caught, and the world flickered, just once, like a candle guttering, in the wind. The air in the ministry corridor tasted like burnt copper and old parchment, a scent that clung to the back of Ron's throat no matter how many times he gasped for breath. He stood frozen just outside the Aura holding wing, fingers curled around the door handle, heart pounding in a rhythm. He knew by now, thud, thud, pause, thud, thud, pause, like a broken clock counting down to zero. Again, the same flicker of candlelight danced across the stone floor. The same drip of water echoed from the far end of the hall. The same chime from the enchanted clock above the lift. 3 tones, sharp and hollow, marking the start. 1 hour. Again. He didn't need to look at his watch. He could feel it. The pressure behind his eyes, the weight in his bones. The way time itself seemed to coil around him like a serpent too tightly wound. He turned the handle, stepped inside. And there she was. Hermione stood at the center of a makeshift lab, surrounded by hovering quills, floating diagrams, and a dozen open tomes that circled slowly in the air like planets in orbit. Her hair was pulled back, but a few frayed curls had escaped, framing her face in wild spirals. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, ink smudged across her left cheek. She didn't look up. "You're late," she said, voice steady, eyes scanning a shimmering projection of temporal energy patterns. Ron swallowed. "I wasn't sure if I should come." She finally looked at him, and her expression shifted just slightly. A flicker in the eyes, a softening at the corners of her mouth. "You always say that, on the 4th loop. Or was it the 5th? "I don't keep count anymore," he admitted, stepping closer. The floor creaked beneath his boots. Same floorboard, same sound. "It's starting to blur. I remember, pieces. You wearing that blue scarf, me spilling tea on your notes, you laughing. But I don't know if it happened or if I just want it to." Hermione turned fully now, her fingers tightening around a slender glass vial filled with swirling silver mist. "The loop isn't just repeating time, Ron, it's remembering," he frowned. "What do you mean?" She held up the vial. Inside, the mist pulsed, once, twice, like a heartbeat. Each time it resets, it carries something forward, not memories, not facts, but feelings, frustration, fear, Hope. Her voice dropped. Love. Ron's breath caught. I've been measuring emotional resonance in the temporal field. The energy signature grows stronger with every cycle. It's unstable. If it peaks before we break the loop, it could lapse inward, take your mind with it. He stared at her. So I'm not just going mad. I'm feeding it. In a way, she said softly. But not just you, me too. Every time I try to reach you, every time I fail, it adds to the charge. Every word we've repeated, every silence, every time I've wanted to touch her hand but didn't. She stopped, eyes glistening. Ron stepped forward, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. Then why keep trying? Because maybe the loop isn't just a prison, she whispered. Maybe it's a test. Maybe it needs more than logic to break. Maybe it needs us, not who we were. Who we are now. He reached out slowly and brushed a curl behind her ear. Her breath hitched. This moment, he said, I've lived it 12 times. 13, I don't know. But this feeling right now, I've never felt it before. She looked up at him, searching his face. Then it's working. The loop is changing. Because we are. Outside, the enchanted clock chimed again. 3 sharp notes, but the sound wavered, distorted, as if heard through water. The candles flickered violently. The book spiraled faster. Hermione clutched the vial tighter. It's reacting. It knows. Ron took her hand. Then let it know this. And for the first time he didn't brace for the reset. He leaned in, felt her fingers tremble in himself, and waited not for the end of the hour, but for something new. The world snapped back into place with a sickening lurch, like a film reel jerking forward and then rewinding too fast. Ron Weasley blinked, his breath hitching as the familiar scent of parchment, ink, and faintly burnt tea filled his nose. He was back. Again. The clock on the wall above Hermione's desk read 2:17 p.m. The quill in her hand paused mid-sentence, hovering over a scroll filled with equations that looked like ancient runes woven through modern physics. Her brow was furrowed, lips pressed thin in concentration. She hadn't noticed him yet. Not this time. He knew the sequence now, knew that in precisely 10 seconds she'd glance up, startled, as if just realizing he'd been sitting across from her all along. Ron, she'd say, voice tight with concern. You're pale. Are you all right? And then it would begin again. The questions, the theories, the same words, the same tone, the same helpless frustration behind her eyes. But this time, something was different. The hourglass on the corner of her desk, tall, slender, made of frosted glass and bound in silver filigree, was cracked. Ron's breath caught. He leaned forward, fingers curling around the edge of the chair. The fracture was thin, almost invisible, a hairline fracture, spiraling from the top bulb down toward the narrow waist. But it was there, and the sand inside, fine, silver gray, unnaturally slow in its descent, now trickled unevenly, as if resisting its own gravity. It hadn't been cracked before. He was certain. He counted the resets. 73, or was it 74? He'd lost count somewhere around the 50th loop, when the edges of his thoughts began to blur, when he started forgetting whether he'd said, I love you, in one timeline, and not another. But he remembered the hourglass, always intact, always perfect, a cruel symbol of time's inevitability, untouched by the chaos it caused. Now it was breaking. Ron? Hermione looked up. Her voice was soft, careful. You're staring. He didn't answer. Not yet. He watched her, the way her fingers tapped once against the desk, the slight dip of her shoulder when she turned to face him, the way a single strand of hair had escaped her braid and curled near her ear. He'd seen all of this before, 100 times, but never with the hourglass cracking. You're doing it again, she said, her voice gentle, but edged with fatigue. That look, like you're trying to memorize me. I am, he whispered. She sighed, setting the quill down. We'll fix this. I just need more time. You don't understand, Ron said, voice rough. There's no more time, not for me. I've lived this hour so many times I don't know if I'm real anymore. But the glass, Hermione, look at it. She turned. Her eyes narrowed. It's the same as always. No, it's not. There's a crack. It's spreading. She stood, walking over slowly, and peered at the hourglass. Her fingers brushed the cool glass, tracing the seam. Her breath stilled. "That wasn't there," she murmured. Ron stood too, stepping closer. "It's breaking. The loop's breaking. But that's impossible. The enchantments are stable. I've reinforced them 3 times. Then why is it cracked?" He reached out, not touching, just hovering his hand over the fracture. "Each time it resets, I feel it more. Like something's tearing inside me. And now this. It's not just me. It's the machine too." Hermione turned to him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with sudden dawning hope. "If the containment is failing, it might mean we can stop it, or it might mean you unravel before we do." Her voice dropped. "Ron, if the structure collapses while you're still inside, I'll be gone. I know." He met her gaze. "But what if this is it? What if the crack means it's weakening? What if we just change something? Not the spells, not the math, but us." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He took her hand, warm, real. "Every time you ask me the same questions. Every time I give you the same answers, but I never tell you what I'm afraid of. I never say how much I need you. Not just to fix this, but to stay." Hermione's breath trembled. The sand in the glass shifted, uneven, stuttering, and for the first time, Ron didn't wait for the reset. He kissed her. Rain tapped against the library windows like impatient fingers, each drop a second slipping through the cracks of time. The air smelled of old parchment and candle wax, thick enough to taste. Hermione's hands trembled as she turned the brittle page, the vellum crackling like dry leaves under her touch. Dust rose in slow spirals, catching in the dim glow of the enchanted lantern above. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she refused to close them. Not yet. Not while Ron was still trapped. She'd marked the rune in red ink, 3 interlocking spirals with a central eye, on 7 separate parchments, each variation tested and discarded. But this one felt different. Older. The book had been buried in the restricted section beneath a false shelf, its title lost to time, its author unknown. The Ministry's reports called it a recursive temporal anomaly. Hermione called it a cage, and now she might have found the key. The rune wasn't in any standard grimoire. It wasn't listed in ancient ruse for beginners, or even in the lost script of the Time Spinners. No, this came from a fragment, half devoured by mildew, cited only once in a footnote of a footnote, referencing a forgotten people who believed time wasn't a line, but a wound that could scar. She traced the summel again with her fingertip, whispering the phonetic approximation she'd reconstructed. Elthara Veth. A shiver ran through her arm as if the air had thickened. The candle flame bent sideways, then snapped back. Across the room, the hourglass, the one the Ministry had planted in the center of the chamber, shuddered. Sand reversed for a fraction of a second before lurching forward again. Hermione held her breath. That hadn't happened before. She reached for the small silver locket she'd enchanted with Ron's voice, recorded during the last cycle before the loop tightened. When she opened it, his voice spilled out, thin and frayed. "Hermione, I can feel it slipping. I don't know how many times I've said this, but you're close. I think you're close." Her throat tightened. She'd played that recording over 100 times. Each time she listened for something new, a clue, a pattern, a break in the rhythm, but it was always the same. And yet today the resonance of his words seemed to vibrate in sync with the rune. She dipped her quill in ink mixed with moonstone powder, and began to draw the symbol on a fresh sheet of dragonhide parchment. The lines hummed as they formed. The air tasted metallic like lightning before a storm. Then quietly she placed the parchment over the hourglass. Nothing happened. She closed her eyes. "It's not about breaking the loop," she whispered. "It's about continuity, about memory, about love, maybe." Her voice cracked. "You remember me, Ron, even when no one else does. Even when time forgets, you remember." She pressed her palm flat against the rune. The sound like glass breaking in slow motion filled the room. The hourglass flared, white light pouring from its seams. The sand froze, then impossibly began to rise, and in that moment she felt it, a presence. Not a voice, not a vision, but a knowing, like a hand brushing hers in the dark. Ron. He was aware, not just reliving, aware, Tears streaked her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I'm here," she said, voice steady now. "I'm still here, and I'm not letting go." The rune on the parchment glowed faintly, then settled into a soft pulsing rhythm, like a heartbeat. The loop hadn't broken. Not yet, but for the first time it had hesitated. And in the silence that followed, Hermione smiled, small, fragile, but real. Because she knew deep in her bones that some bonds don't obey time. The clock above the ministry corridor ticked with a sound like a heartbeat. Steady, insistent, wrong. Ron blinked, his breath shallow, his fingers curled against the cool stone of the wall. Again, the same cracked tile beneath his left shoe. The same flicker in the torchlight. The same distant echo of footsteps that would pass exactly 7 seconds from now. He had counted them 100 times. 1,000. He didn't know anymore. Time had frayed at the edges, unraveling into a loop of 60 minutes that folded in on itself, like a Mobius strip of memory and dread. He turned his head. There she was, Hermione, rushing toward him, her hair a wild corona under the dim light, her robes slightly askew from sprinting through the corridors. "Ron, I've found something," she began, her voice urgent, familiar, beautiful, in a way that aches now. "I know," he said, quiet, defeated. "You tell me every time." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Not this time. This time I'm not just theorizing. I've isolated the resonance frequency of the temporal acre. If I can disrupt it at the moment of collapse, even for a fraction of a second, it might create a bridge, a window. You could reach back, we could pull you out." Ron looked at her, really looked. Not at the words, not at the frantic energy, but at the curve of her lip when she was trying not to cry, the way her left hand trembled when she was afraid. He had never noticed that before. Not in all the years, not in all the battles, not when they were standing side by side against Death Eaters, or holding each other after the war. "I'm tired, Hermione," he whispered. Her expression softened. "I know, but just once more. Try one more time." He nodded, because he always did, because he couldn't stop, because the loop demanded repetition like a starving beast. She stepped closer, pulling a small, glowing device from her robes, a delicate lattice of enchanted brass and crystal humming with unstable magic. "When the hour resets, I'll activate it. You have to focus on me, on now, on something real. Not the loop, not the fear. Something true." Ron exhaled. Something true. The air began to shimmer. The torchlight dimmed. The clock's ticking slowed, stretched, groaned. She reached for him. And then, skin, warmth. Her fingers brushed his palm, tentative at first, then curling around his hand with a pressure that felt like coming home. Ron froze. No, this had never happened. In 100 loops, in 1,000 repetitions, she had never touched him. The magic always pulled him away a second too soon. Always. But now, her hand was in his. Her thumb moved, just slightly, across his knuckle. A shiver ran up his arm, through his chest, into his throat. "Ron," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm here. I'm right here." He looked into her eyes. They were glistening, not with scientific triumph, but with something deeper. Something that had been there all along, buried beneath books and battles and unspoken words. "I feel you," he said, stunned. I'm really feeling you." The world trembled. The air cracked like thin ice. The loop was breaking down, but he didn't let go. Either did she. The device flared, light erupting in golden spirals around them. And for the first time, Ron didn't brace for the reset. He held on, not to time, not to memory, but to her. And in that instant, as the hourglass shattered somewhere beyond perception, he understood. The loop wasn't broken by force or formula. It was broken by touch. The glass of the containment chamber fogged with every breath. Ron exhaled, each misty circle a fleeting record of time that would vanish when the loop reset. He pressed his palm flat against the cool surface, watching as the spell-laced glass shimmered faintly, rejecting contact. Outside, Hermione stood hunched over a stack of scrolls, her quill scratching furiously in the dim green glow of the containment runes. Her hair was loose, frayed at the edges from hours without sleep, and a smudge of ink ran like a scar across her cheekbone. He could hear her voice when the loop first began, The real first, the one before repetition stripped meaning from sound. Now, the words blurred into noise every time the hour reset. But the glass remembered. On the 7th loop, though he stopped counting after 30, Ron scratched a single line into the condensation with his fingernail. A mark, a message, just a dash, but it was his. Hermione looked up. Her eyes widened. She didn't see him. Not really. The ministry monitor showed only a still image of a man standing in stasis, caught in temporal suspension. But she saw the mark, and she wrote something back. A small hand mirror appeared the next cycle, propped on a stool just beyond the glass. It wobbled slightly, angled to reflect the chamber wall. Ron approached slowly, pulse thudding. In the warped silver of the mirror's surface, words had been etched in careful script. "Can you see this?" He wiped the glass clean with his sleeve, then wrote, "Yes, I see you." The next loop, she was waiting. The mirror now displayed a new message. "What day is it?" Ron hesitated. How to explain that? Days no longer existed. That he lived in an hour, over and over. Like a record skipping on a phonograph. He wrote back, "Always 3:17 p.m., always the same. I remember everything, you don't." She didn't respond for 3 loops. When she did, the mirror read, "I remember you. Not the cycles, but you." His breath caught. They began to build a language. Not words, not at first. Symbols. A circle for yes, a cross for no, a spiral for "I'm losing time," a pair of arrows facing each other for "stay with me." They learned the rhythm of the loop, the exact second the runes pulsed blue, the moment the air thickened before reset. Hermione timed her messages to appear in the 30 seconds before collapse, knowing he'd carry them forward. "1 cycle," she wrote. "Tell me something." Only Ron would know. He stared at the mirror, heart aching. Then slowly he wrote on the glass, "In 4th year, you cried in the prefect's bathroom because Parvati said you had buck teeth. I never told anyone I heard you. I punched a locker the next day. Nearly broke my hand." The mirror went blank. In the next loop, a new message. "You were supposed to be at Quidditch practice." A laugh burst from him. Raw, startled, real. The first in how many loops? She was remembering him. Not just the prisoner in the glass. The boy who ate too fast, who blushed when she praised him, who once tried to transfigure himself into a duck to impress her. The system grew. They used powdered moonstone dust to etch messages into the mirror's surface, glowing sigils that lasted longer. He taught her the exact cadence of his breath, so she could time her words to the rise and fall of his chest, visible through the glass. She learned when he blinked too fast, he was scared. When he tilted his head left, he was lying. And then, 1 loop, she didn't write. The mirror was blank. Ron pounded the glass. "Hermione, Hermione, look at me." She sat at her desk, motionless, eyes hollow. A new bruise bloomed beneath her left eye. A healer stood beside her, shaking his head. Ron's blood turned to ice. He pressed both hands to the glass and wrote, trembling, "Don't give up. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still." The world folded in on itself. When the loop reset, the mirror was gone. But on the glass, already written in delicate, glowing script, Hermione's hand, it read, "I will find you. Even if time breaks us, I will find you." The stone floor was cold beneath Ron's palms as he pushed himself up, his breath ragged from a fall he hadn't taken yet. The air smelled of damp parchment and burnt cinnamon, Hermione's experimental incense, always just a little too strong. He didn't need to look at the clock on the wall to know the time. 3:14 p.m. The chime would come in 7 seconds. He counted them silently, each one a stone dropping into the well of his memory. 1. The candle on the desk flickers, draft from the cracked window. 2. A sparrow taps twice against the glass, startled by its own reflection. 3. The ministry seal on the containment report glows faintly blue, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. 4. The tea in Hermione's cup swirls, once, counterclockwise, though no one has touched it. 5. Footsteps, soft, urgent, echo down the hall. Her boots, polished but scuffed at the heel, appear beneath the door. 6. The chime, low, resonant. The loop begins. "Ron?" Her voice cracked the silence before the sound had fully faded. She stepped into the room, robes fluttering like wings, her hair wilder than usual, as though she'd been running her hands through it again. She always did that when she was afraid. "I'm here," he said, not turning. He already knew what she'd do next. Reach for him, hesitate, then pull back. She wouldn't touch him until 3:17, when her fingers would brush his arm as she passed, checking for fever. He'd memorized the weight of that touch, feather-light but trembling. You're okay?" she asked, voice tight. "You were gone, again. For nearly 4 minutes this time." "I wasn't gone," he said. "I was here. I'm always here." She didn't understand. How could she? To her, this was a crisis. To him, it was a rhythm, a song he'd heard 1,000 times. He stood, slow, deliberate. At 3:15, the floorboard near the bookshelf groaned under his weight. He shifted his foot, left, not right, to avoid it. A small defiance. The first real choice he'd made in cycles. Hermione's eyes narrowed. "You're different." "No," he said. "I'm the same. You're just seeing me more clearly." She flinched as if he'd struck her. Because he had. In every loop before, he'd been frantic, shouting, demanding answers. Now he was calm, too calm. She didn't know what to do with a Ron who didn't panic. At 3:18, the quill on her desk trembled, ink pooling at its tip. At 3:19, the portrait of Arcturus Black muttered something about chromal decay. At 3:20, she finally touched him. Her hand on his arm, warm, urgent, searching. He closed his eyes. He could recite the exact pressure of her fingertips, the faint callus on her index from years of writing. He knew she'd whisper, "I'm so sorry," at 3:21, and he'd say, "It's not your fault," at 3:22, even though it was. Even though he could see the guilt carved into the lines between her brows. But this time, he didn't answer. "You have to hold on, Ron," she said, voice fraying. "I'm close. I've found a resonance pattern in the hourglass. If I can align the temporal countersignature—" "You'll fail," he said gently. She froze. What? "What?" "You'll fail. At 3:25, the spell will backfire. The glass will crack. You'll burn your hand reaching for it. You always do." Her breath hitched. "How could you "I've lived this hour," he said, 137 times. "Maybe more. I've lost count. I know when you'll cry. I know the exact shade of red your face turns when you're frustrated. I know you wear your mother's locket on days you feel helpless." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then tell me how to fix it." He turned to face her. At 3:26, the light from the window would catch the gold in her hair, turning it to fire. It was happening now. "I don't think it's about fixing time," he said. "I think it's about us." She took a step back. "What are you talking about?" "The loop doesn't just repeat the hour," he said. "It repeats us. The way we speak, the things we don't say, the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." Her mouth opened, then closed. At 3:27, the world would tremble. The hourglass on the shelf would begin to glow. The end of the cycle was near. But Ron didn't move. He stayed where he was, watching her, memorizing not the hour, but her. And for the first time, he wondered if breaking the loop meant not escaping time, but finally stepping into it. Together. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the laboratory's reinforced glass, each drop a tiny hammer on the fragile surface of Hermione Granger's control. Inside the Ministry's temporal research annex, the air hummed with restrained energy, spells woven into the walls, runes glowing in concentric circles around the central containment chamber, where the hourglass still spun, suspended in a field of enchanted silver light. But the light had dimmed, so had hope. She sat hunched over a stack of parchment, quills scattered like broken arrows across the desk. Her robes were rumpled, the sleeves pushed up past her elbows, ink smudged on her fingertips and even along her cheek where she'd absent-mindedly brushed her skin. The clock on the wall ticked forward, 3:10 in the morning. But Hermione didn't look up. She already knew the time. She knew it too well. Every second was a weight, every minute another stone added to the cairn of her exhaustion. Across the room, 2 junior researchers dozed in their chairs, heads lolling, one with a book open on their lap. They'd been working in shifts, but Hermione hadn't slept in 3 days. Not properly, not since Ron vanished into the loop. She remembered his last words. "Don't worry, it's just a test," spoken with that infuriating easy grin. And then the flash. The crack of collapsing time. The way the air had screamed as the hourglass imploded and spat him back into a single repeating hour. But he wasn't spitting back out. He was stuck. She leaned back, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. When she opened them again, the chalkboard loomed before her, covered in frantic equations, annotated diagrams of temporal spirals, and a single circled phrase. Memory persistence equals temporal anchoring. Ron remembered each cycle. That was both the miracle and the curse. His mind was holding on, but for how long? The Ministry's reports were clear. Prolonged exposure to recursive timeframes led to cognitive fragmentation, hallucinations, loss of identity. She had seen it in test subjects, mice mostly, but one wizard who'd gone mad whispering the same apology over and over until they silenced his vocal cords. A shiver ran down her spine. She stood pacing between the desks, her footsteps muffled by the thick absorbent rug, meant to dampen magical resonance. Each step echoed in her skull. She stopped in front of the containment chamber, staring at the hourglass. The sand inside no longer fell. It hung suspended, as if time itself were holding its breath. "Ron," she whispered, pressing her palm against the cool barrier. "Can you hear me?" No answer. There never was, but she kept trying. Last cycle, she had begun calling them cycles now, like he did. She'd sent in a recorded message via enchanted parchment. He responded, just barely scribbling back. "You look tired. Have you slept?" Even trapped in time, he worried about her, and that had nearly broken her. She turned away, returning to her notes. There had to be a flaw in their calculations, a variable they'd missed. She scanned the latest data from the resonance scanners, faint pulses every 63 minutes, like a heartbeat out of sync with the world. That was him. That was Ron, trying to reach back. Her quill flew across the page, rewriting a formula, adjusting the coefficient for emotional tethering. The theory was untested, borderline heretical, using personal connection as an anchor through temporal distortion. But love wasn't in the textbooks. Either was grief, and she was running out of options that were. A soft chime sounded. One of the monitoring spells had triggered. She rushed to the console. The hourglass flickered, just once, and the sand shifted. Not much. A grain, maybe. But it moved. Her breath caught. "Ron," she said again, louder this time. "If that's you," blinked the light twice. Silence. Then, flicker, flicker. She laughed. A short, breathless sound that trembled on the edge of tears. "You're still in there," she murmured. "You're still fighting." Outside, the rain slowed. The sky, just beyond the artificial glow of the lab, began to lighten at the edges. Dawn was coming. Another day. Another chance. She sat back down, hands steady now. There was work to do, and as long as Ron was in that loop remembering her, reaching for her, she would not stop. She would not sleep. Not until she pulled him back. The clock on the wall ticks in a rhythm that no longer means anything. Ron watches it, unblinking, as the second hand drags itself forward, then snaps back. Again, the same hour, the same breath, the same ache behind his ribs. He sat across from her for the 10th time, maybe the 100th. He's lost count, but Hermione doesn't know that. To her, it's always the first time, always the same urgency in her voice, the same crease between her brows as she leans over a stack of parchment covered in equations that shift like sand. "Ron, focus," she says, and her voice, soft but edged with worry, catches on the word, like it always does. "We're close. I can feel it." He wants to tell her he's heard her say that 37 times. That last loop, she broke down crying when the runes flickered and died. That 2 loops before that, he kissed her before she could speak, just to feel it once, even if it meant resetting into silence again. But he doesn't say any of that. He just nods. Her quill scratches across the page, and Ron studies her instead. The way a loose curl escapes her bun and brushes her cheek, the faint smudge of ink on her thumb, the way her lower lip trembles when she's holding back frustration. Things he never noticed before. Things he's memorized now, like the beat of his heart. "Did you sleep at all last night?" he asks, because he remembers. She didn't. She stayed up until 3, muttering about temporal feedback loops, her shoulders hunched under a too thin cardigan. She looks up, startled. "How did you—" "I know you," he says quietly. You don't sleep when you're scared. Her breath hitches. For a second, so brief you might imagine it, her eyes glisten. I'm not scared. I'm determined. Same thing, sometimes. She smiles then, small and fragile. And something inside him cracks. This is the part he dreads. Not the looping, not the disorientation. It's this, feeling everything deeper each time. The loops aren't just repeating moments. They're layering emotions, stacking longing on top of regret, love on top of guilt, until it all threatens to crush him. Last time he told her he loved her. She laughed, thinking it a joke, and the sound stung like salt in a wound. The time before, he stayed silent, and the silence screamed. Now he reaches across the table, his fingers brush hers, just once, feather light. She freezes, looks at his hand, looks at him. You've been different, she whispers. Each time I see you, you're heavier, like you've lived more than an hour. He doesn't answer. Can't, Ron, she says, voice trembling. What aren't you telling me? He wants to scream, wants to pull her into his arms and beg the universe to let this moment stick. But the clock ticks, the air shimmers. He feels it, the pull, the unraveling. No, he mutters. Not yet. Please, not yet. Ron. The room blurs. Colors bleed into one another. The scent of old paper and peppermint tea fades. But this time something lingers. Her voice, not the words, not the logic, but the tone, the way she said his name when it mattered, like it always mattered. And in the dark between loops, as his mind frays at the edges, he clings to that sound. Not because it gives him hope, but because it reminds him who he is, and who he's fighting to become. The clock on the wall stuttered. 1 second it read 3:17, the next it flickered to 3:19, then snapped back to 3:17 with a sharp click like a bone resetting. Ron blinked, his breath catching in his throat. That hadn't happened before. He stood in the Ministry's sub-level research wing, same as always, the sterile white tiles under his boots, the hum of containment fields vibrating low in his ears, the faint scent of ozone and old parchment. And Hermione, 3 meters ahead, her back to him, bent over a console, fingers flying across a glyph-etched interface. Ron, she said, not turning, the resonance field is fluctuating again. I need you to hold position, don't move. He opened his mouth to answer, but the world blinked. Not a full reset. No, this was different. The air shivered. For a fractured second, the room was darker, smoky, lit by torches instead of lamps. Hermione wore different robes, emerald green, singed at the hem. And she wasn't alone. A version of Harry stood beside her, face drawn, a jagged scar across his cheek. Ron had never seen. Then, snap, back to the lab, the lights steady. Hermione still at the console, her braids slipping over her shoulder. Ron swayed on his feet. His head throbbed, a dull pressure behind his eyes, like something was trying to push in. Hermione, he said, voice rough. Did you see that? She turned then, brow furrowed. See what? Ron, you're supposed to be standing still. You know the parameters. If you move, the calibration fails. But the clock. He pointed, but the clock read 3:17 again, smooth as if nothing had happened. It jumped, and I saw Harry. He was here, but not. Her expression softened, concern replacing irritation. You're seeing echoes, she said quietly. Temporal fractures. The loop's containment is breaking down. It's pulling in fragments of other possibilities, other versions of time that almost were. Almost were? Ron rubbed his temples. You mean other lives. Versions, she corrected. Choices not taken. Paths not walked. The spell was meant to hold time in stasis, but now it's fraying. And you're caught in the tear. He looked at her, really looked. The soft curve of her lips when she worried, the way her lower lip caught slightly on her teeth when she concentrated. He'd noticed it once before, in a loop where she'd laughed at something he said, something he couldn't remember now. But now, with time stuttering like a broken record, those small things burned brighter. Another flicker. This time, he was taller, broader, standing in a sunlit kitchen. A woman with wild red curls. Ginny? No. Older, wearier. Handed him a mug. A toddler with messy black hair giggled on the floor. His heart clenched. He reached out and stumbled back into the lab, gasping. His hands were empty. Ron, Hermione was at his side now, gripping his arm. Her palm was warm, real. "Stay with me. Focus on my voice. Don't let the fragments pull you under." He nodded, jaw tight. "I saw a life with Ginny. A son, I think." "I know," she whispered. "I've been monitoring the bleed-through. The spell isn't just looping you. It's showing you what could have been, what might still be." "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why now?" "Because the loop is dying," she said. "And you're the only one who can end it. But you have to choose, Ron. Not just to break free, but to let go of the fear that's keeping you here." He stared at her. "Fear? Of not being enough," she said gently. "Of being left behind. You've lived this hour hundreds, thousands of times. And every time you hesitate, every time you wait for someone else to save you." The truth of it struck like a curse to the chest. Another flicker, this one longer. He stood on a battlefield, smoke curling in the wind. Hermione lay motionless in the mud. He screamed her name, but no sound came. Then, darkness. He gasped back into the present, trembling. Tears burned his eyes. "I'm scared," he admitted, voice raw. "I'm so tired of being scared." Hermione cupped his face, her thumbs brushing his cheeks. "Then stop running," she said. "Stay with me, now, not in the past, not in some other life. Here." He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her. Ink, lavender, warmth. And for the first time, when the clock ticked forward, 3:18, he didn't flinch. The air tasted stale, like old parchment and cold tea, as Ron blinked into consciousness, again. The same slant of afternoon light cut across the ministry corridor, the same dusty beam catching motes that spiraled in slow, unchanging patterns. His fingers curled against the cool stone floor. He knew without looking that his watch would read 3:17. It always did. He pushed himself up, knees aching, as if they remembered every fall, every failed attempt. The silence pressed in, thick and unnatural. No footsteps, no distant chatter, no hum of enchanted machinery, just the quiet ticking of a clock that only he could hear, buried somewhere beneath the walls like a failing heartbeat. Then a flicker. A spark of blue light danced at the edge of the corridor. Ron held his breath. It pulsed once, twice, then flared into a shimmering sigil, drawn in mid-air, glowing like frost on glass. His name hovered at its center, then dissolved into words. "Ron, listen carefully. The loop is fraying your neural pathways. Every repetition carves a deeper groove in your mind, and the longer you stay, the more your brain will resist returning to linear time. It may reject it entirely." He read it once, then again, mouth forming the words silently. Her handwriting. He'd know it anywhere. The neat, slanted letters. The way she looped her. G's, like tiny anchors. "We're close. But if you're not ready to let go when the moment comes, your mind might not survive the break. You have to want to come back. You have to remember who you are outside the hour." A gust of wind that didn't exist stirred the paper in his pocket. He pulled it out, another note, from a cycle ago, smudged with sweat and rewritten in different ink each time he found it. He'd stopped counting how many versions he'd collected. They all said the same thing in the end. "Hold on, we're coming." But coming meant nothing here. Time didn't move, not for everyone else, only for him. He pressed his palm to the wall, feeling the faint vibration of something deep below. Probably the containment chamber, where the broken hourglass still spun, its golden sand flowing backward in a sealed vacuum. Hermione called it a temporal anger. He called it a curse. Footsteps echoed, real this time. Light, quick, familiar. He turned. Hermione appeared around the corner, her hair slightly frizzed from the humidity in the lower levels, her robe smudged with soot from the lifts. She carried a satchel slung over one shoulder, bulging with books, and what looked like a cracked crystal vial. "You're here," she said, breathless. "I wasn't sure. I'm always here," Ron said, voice rough. "Same time, same place." She flinched just slightly. He saw it, the way her fingers twitched, how her eyes darted to his face, searching for something. A crack, a sign he was slipping. "I sent the message," she said. "Did you get it?" He nodded toward the fading sigil. Just now. Her shoulders dropped, just a fraction. Good, then you know what's at stake. I'm going mad, Hermione, slowly. Not all at once, but piece by piece. I forget things. Not the loop, never that, but other things. My first broom, the taste of Mong's shepherd's pie, Ginny's laugh when she was little. He swallowed. I remembered your birthday last time. This time, I had to check my notes. She stepped forward, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the faint smudge of ink on her wrist. Then hold on to something real, something that isn't tied to this hour. Like what? Like how I kissed you after the battle, she said, voice low. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Because it was quiet, and you were alive, and I couldn't wait another second. He blinked. That memory, warm, golden, sunlit, flooded in. The smell of smoke and grass. The way her hands had trembled against his cheeks. It wasn't in the loop. It never repeated. It belonged to a world that moved forward. His breath caught. I remember that. Then remember it again, she said. And again. Let it be the thing that pulls you back. Not the hour, not the cycle, me. The light flickered. The air hummed. The world began to fray at the edges. He reached for her hand, but she was already fading, and the watch on his wrist ticked toward 3:17 once more. The clock above the ministry atrium chimed 3 times, low and hollow, and Ron Weasley blinked as if waking from a dream he hadn't known he was having. Again. His fingers curled around the edge of the stone bench, knuckles white, the roughness of the engraved initials beneath his thumb, the only thing tethering him to what felt real. He exhaled, slow and shaky, and stared at the crack in the pavement near his left foot, the one shaped like a lightning strike. He'd counted it 17 times now, or was it 18? The numbers blurred when he tried to pull them from the fog in his head. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around a small, sharp shard of mirror. He'd nicked it from a broken lavatory tile, 2 loops ago, or was it 3? Time wasn't linear anymore. It was a spiral, tightening around his ribs with every tick. He pressed the edge into his palm, just enough to feel it, to remember he could still feel. Then, with deliberate care, he scratched into the bench beside the initials, not his own this time, but a single word. Listen. It faded almost immediately, shimmering like mist under sunlight. But not all things vanished when the hour reset. Some objects, old, solid, anchored, resisted the unraveling. The bench, carved from enchanted granite, held traces. The crack in the pavement had been there through 6 loops. The oak tree near the fountain never quite shed the same leaves. And Hermione's scarf, red with gold thread wrapped tightly around her neck, remained, cycle after cycle, like a promise. She appeared then, as she always did, stepping through the shimmering archway with a stack of scrolls under one arm and worry etched into the line between her brows. Ron, she said, voice soft but urgent. You're here again. I'm always here, he muttered, standing. His legs ached, though he hadn't walked far. Or had he? He couldn't remember moving between cycles. Only waking, always waking, right here. She studied him, really studied him, and he hated it. Not because she didn't care. She did too much. But because he could see the moment she decided not to push. Again. That careful distance, the way she braced herself like he might shatter. Did you sleep at all? She asked. No. He said, I've been trying to remember what happens next. But it's like my brain's sandpaper. Everything smooths out. She stepped closer, and for a heartbeat, he caught the scent of her. Parchment, lavender, something warm like tea. He focused on it. A fixed point. Ron, we're close. I found anomalies in the temporal resonance. There's a pattern. How many times have you said that? He asked, not unkindly. She hesitated. I don't know, but I remember you. That has to mean something. He turned, running a hand over the bench. Try the left leg, near the base. She frowned, crouched, and brushed her fingers over the stone. There's a mark. Faint. It looks like, don't trust the echo, Ron's breath caught. I wrote that, in a loop you don't remember, but the stone did. Her eyes widened. You're leaving messages for yourself. For us, he corrected. For anyone who's still listening. She stood, clutching the scrolls tighter. Then we'll use it. We'll find the things that last, and we'll write the truth into them. He nodded, throat tight. And when you see me next, the next time I'm sitting here, blank, lost, look for the marks. They're not just warnings. They're me. Still here. She reached out, touched his arm. Just for a second, but it burned through his sleeve like a brand. "I'll find you," she whispered, "every time." The clock began to chime again, and the world folded in on itself. But this time, as the light dimmed, and the air stilled, Ron mouthed 3 words against the silence, not for the world, but for the woman who might remember. "Listen, I'm here." The clock tower struck 3 again. The chime rippled through the air like a stone dropped into still water, and Ron Weasley flinched as if struck. He was already crouched behind the stone bench in the Ministry atrium, fingers pressed into the cold marble seam where the floor met the wall. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He'd felt the pull before, the sudden lurch in his chest, the way the light bent just slightly at the edges of his vision, and he'd dropped into position before the world could tear itself apart and stitch back together. Again, he squeezed his eyes shut. "Not real, not real, not real," he muttered, but he didn't believe it. The ache in his knees, the grit under his fingernails, the echo of Hermione's voice, none of it was supposed to linger. But it did. They did. Ron. Her voice came from somewhere beyond the fountain. He didn't turn. He couldn't. Last time when he'd looked, she'd been 20 feet away, then 10, then right beside him, only to vanish when he blinked. She wasn't real, not in the way he needed her to be. But her voice stayed. "Ron, listen. You have to reach the anchor. It's in the memory, not the event, the memory." He exhaled sharply. That was new, or maybe it wasn't. He'd lost count of how many times she'd said her lines, how many variations of the same plea, the same warning, the same soft, desperate "Ron, please." But this one had weight. He opened his eyes. The atrium glittered under the enchanted ceiling, clouds drifting lazily above. Gold statues stood frozen in mid-gesture. People walked, talked, turned pages, dozens of lives ticking forward, unaware. Only he stood still, caught in the hourglass. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his trousers. The fountain of magical brethren gurgled. A witch in lime green robes stepped aside without seeing him. He was a ghost in his own life. And then, there she was. Hermione stood near the lifts, clutching a stack of files to her chest. Her hair was pinned back, but a curl had escaped, brushing her cheek. She was looking right at him. No, not at him. Through him, but her lips moved. "You were late to potions that day, 3rd year. You spilled the shrinking solution, and I yelled at you. Do you remember?" Ron froze. He did. It had been a Tuesday. Snape's dungeon had smelled of burnt porridge and pickled slugs. Ron had been trying to impress Harry by miming a troll with the ladle. Hermione had snapped her book shut, eyes blazing. "Honestly, Ronald, one day you'll get us all expelled." And he'd laughed, because even angry, she was brilliant. And pretty, though he'd never said that out loud. "Not then, Ron," she whispered, still staring past him. "The anchor isn't in the Ministry, it's in you." His throat tightened. He took a step, then another. The atrium shimmered at the edges. The air hummed, low and insistent, like a plucked wire. He knew what came next, the flicker of light, the snap of time folding in on itself, the reset. But this time, he didn't run. He reached her, just as the world began to fray. "Hermione," he said, voice raw. "I remember." She didn't turn, but her fingers trembled against the files. "You said you'd never forget the way I looked when I turned into a cat. But you did. You forgot for years, and I never told you, because I was afraid you'd laugh." Ron's breath caught. "I wasn't laughing," he whispered. "I was scared. I thought I'd lost you." A tear slipped down her cheek. Still, she didn't look at him. "The loop doesn't break with magic, Ron," she said. "It breaks with truth." The chime struck again. 3 times, too loud, too close. The world blurred. But this time, he held on. To her voice, to the curl on her cheek, to the weight of the thing he'd never said. And for the first time, when the hourglass turned, something inside him did too. Rain tapped against the window pane of the Ministry's sub-level research chamber, a quiet rhythm drowned by the hum of unstable enchantments. Ron stood in the center of a chalk-drawn sigil, his breath shallow, his fingers twitching at his sides. He'd lost count of how many times he'd stood here. 50? 100? but the weight in his chest told him it was more, much more. Each reset began the same, the flicker of candlelight, the scent of damp parchment, and then Hermione's voice, urgent, soft. "Ron, can you hear me?" He turned. She stood just outside the warding circle, her wand steady, eyes wide with the kind of focus that bordered on obsession. Her hair was pulled back, not neatly. Strands had escaped, clinging to her temples with sweat. She looked exhausted. He didn't need to remember the last loop to know she hadn't slept. "I hear you," he said, voice rough. "I always hear you." She stepped forward, careful not to break the circle's edge. "Good. That means the anchor's holding." "You're remembering more now, aren't you?" Ron swallowed. The edges of his mind felt frayed like pages torn from a book. But yes, he remembered things now. Not just actions, but feelings. The way her hand had brushed his sleeve when she passed him a quill. The way she'd paused just once before saying his name. "I remember you saying I was brave," he said quietly, "but I don't think I believed you." Hermione's breath caught. "You are brave, Ron. You're the reason I haven't given up." He almost laughed. "You're the one who's been working non-stop. I'm just stuck." "But you're not passive," she insisted. "You're fighting. Every time the loop resets, you hold on. You come back. That's not just memory. It's will. And will needs an anchor. Something real, something strong." Ron looked down at his hands. They trembled. "You think I'm holding on to something. I know it," she said. "The temporal field isn't random. It's anchored in emotion." The magic latched on to the moment it found the deepest resonance. "I've been analyzing the fluctuations, and every spike aligns with the same memory, the one from the Chamber of Secrets." His head snapped up. "The basilisk?" "No," she said gently. "After. When I thought you were dead." Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Rain outside slowed. Even the candles seemed to dim. Ron closed his eyes. He remembered it, the cold stone, the blood on his robes, the way his chest had burned. But more than that, he remembered the sound of her voice. Not the shouts, not the spells, but the quiet sob, the whisper of his name, the way she had pressed her forehead to his shoulder, like she was trying to breathe him back into life. "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't know you." "Of course you didn't," she said quickly, tears glistening. "I didn't wet you. I was always so careful, always logical, always in control. But in that moment, I wasn't. I think that's why the magic chose it, because it was real, because I loved you, and I wasn't hiding it." Ron's breath stilled. She loved him, not past tense, not hidden behind books or bickering. Loved, now, here, and maybe always. "I've said it before," she whispered. "In other loops, you just didn't believe me, but this time you're listening." He stepped forward, forgetting the circle, but she reached out, just a hand, just a gesture. "Don't break the wards," she said. "Not yet, but Ron, if we want to end this, you have to let go of that moment, not forget it. Let it go. The magic is feeding on your guilt, your fear that you almost died, that you almost left her, left me, behind. But you didn't. I'm here, you're here, and we're still writing the story." Ron looked into her eyes, brown, fierce, endless, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he believed her. He exhaled. "Then let's write a better ending." The clock tower chimed 3 times, each note hollow and stretched, like a record played too slow. Ron blinked. Again, the same cracked tile by the fireplace. Number 7 from the left caught his eye. He'd counted it 12 cycles ago, 13 now, if he remembered right. His fingers twitched against the arm of the chair, nails catching on a loose thread. He didn't need to look to know Hermione would step through the door in exactly 23 seconds. He could already hear the soft scuff of her boots on stone, the rustle of parchment tucked under her arm. She entered, breathless, her hair, a wild halo from the wind outside. "Ron, you're awake." "Obviously," he said, voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken much lately. What was the point? She wouldn't remember. None of it would stick. She set down a satchel, pulling out vials and diagrams, her movements precise, rehearsed. He'd seen this dance too many times. The furrow of her brow, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear only for it to spring free seconds later. But today, this time, something was different. A smudge of ink on her wrist. Not from the quill. Older, faded like a memory pressed into skin. "You're hurt," he said. She froze. "What?" "Your wrist. There's a mark." She glanced down, then quickly pulled her sleeve over it. "Old ink." "Nothing." Ron stood. "No. It's not ink. It's a scar. You didn't have it yesterday." "Ron, sit down. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearer than I ever have," he snapped. "I've lived this hour 100 times. Maybe more. I know your voice. I know how you pause before saying my name when you're worried. I know you bite your lip when you lie." She looked away. "That mark," he pressed. "It's from the hourglass, isn't it?" She didn't answer, but her silence was louder than words. Ron moved to the center of the room, where the device hovered. A twisted coil of silver and black glass, shaped like an hourglass, but wrong. Its sands, not falling, but writhing, as if alive. He'd tried to break it before. Each time, the world reset. Each time, it grew stronger. "It's not just trapping me," he said slowly. "It's feeding." Hermione closed her eyes. "We didn't know at first. The Ministry thought it was a containment field, something to stabilize time rifts. But it's sentient. It latches onto emotional resonance, attachment, memory. And you've been trying to reach me," Ron whispered. "Every time you pour more of yourself into the spell, your memories, your feelings," she finished, voice breaking. "Yes," that explained it. The scar, the way she looked at him now, not just as a friend, not just as a project, but with something deeper, something she'd never said aloud. And with every loop, the hourglass took a piece of that. Ron stepped closer. "It's hurting you. I don't care. You should." His voice softened. "I do." She looked up, startled. "I remember everything," he said, "not just the loops. I remember you, how you stayed up all night helping me study for charms, how you fought Bellatrix for me, how you cried when I left during the hunt. I never told you I saw that." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Ron, the hourglass isn't just feeding on time. It's feeding on us, on what we are to each other." She reached for his hand, fingers trembling. "Then maybe that's how we stop it." "How?" "By giving it everything. Not in pieces, not loop after loop, all at once, willingly." Ron studied her face, the fear, the hope, the love. She'd hidden for years. He squeezed her hand. "You're terrifying, you know that?" She almost smiled. "So I've been told." The hourglass pulsed, dark sand swirling faster. The air hummed. Ron took a breath. "Then let's give it a heart attack." And together, they stepped forward. The air tasted stale, thick with the scent of damp parchment and burnt incense. The Ministry's failed containment spells, still clinging to the walls like ghosts. Ron stood in the center of the ruined chamber, the fractured hourglass pulsing at his feet, its sands suspended mid-fall, glimmering like crushed stars. Each grain flickered with memory, Hermione's hands pressing his, her voice cracking as she said, "I'm not losing you again." Over and over, that moment played, sharper now, more real than the world around him. He had lived this hour 12,347 times. At least that was the count he kept before numbers began to blur. At first he screamed, then he counted ceiling tiles. Then he memorized the way Hermione's hair caught the light when she turned, just so, how her left eyebrow arched higher when she lied about understanding time magic. He knew her now in ways no one else ever could. He knew the hitch in her breath before she cried, the way she tapped her fingers against her thigh when she was scared. But knowing her wasn't freedom. The loop tightened each time. Cycles bled together. He'd wake now, not in the Ministry, but in fragments. Her laughter in the burrow kitchen, her hand brushing his before a Quidditch match, her standing alone in the rain after the war. Memories, real and looped, tangled, like knotted thread. His mind frayed at the edges. He forgot his mother's voice, forgot what silence felt like, and yet she was always there. Hermione burst through the chamber doors again, her robe singed at the hem, a fresh bruise looming on her temple. "Ron," she gasped, "I've found it. The anchor. It's your last conscious memory, before the rupture. If we undo it, the loop collapses." He stared at her. "Undo it how?" She stepped closer, eyes glistening. "We erase it, the moment before the accident. You won't remember any of this. Not the loops." "Not me telling you." Her voice broke. Not me telling you I love you." The words landed like stones. He'd heard them once, near the end of cycle 8000-something. She'd whispered them, thinking he wasn't listening. He'd replayed that whisper more than any other moment. "You're asking me to forget that?" he asked, voice rough. "I'm asking you to live," she said. "Not repeat, not suffer. Live." The hourglass trembled. The air hummed. Another reset pulsed at the edge of time, ready to drag him back. Ron looked at her, really looked. The shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights. The chipped nail from where she'd torn at the ministry's runes. The way her lower lip trembled just before she lied. He knew her exhaustion, her stubborn hope, her quiet despair. And he knew with a certainty that cut through the fog of cycles that he couldn't let her keep doing this. "How long have you been trying?" he asked softly. She hesitated. 3 months. Outside time. "Each loop is a blink to me. But I feel every second you're gone." He reached for her hand. Her skin was warm, real. "I've lived years with you," he said. "Even when you didn't know. I've seen you cry. I've seen you furious. I've seen you so tired you forget your own name. And I've loved you. So much. In every version of this hour. If I let go, will you promise to tell me again? Somewhere, someday, when I'm just Ron and you're just Hermione." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'll spend every day making sure you know." He smiled. A real one, not one shaped by repetition. Then he stepped toward the hourglass. "No spell," he said. "No wand. Just me. Letting go." She nodded, fingers tightening around his for a heartbeat, then releasing. Ron closed his eyes. He didn't fight the pull. He thought of her voice, that first time she said his name in the Hogwarts corridor. He thought of chess pieces shattering, of cold butterbeer in summer, of her hand in his, not as a memory, but as a beginning. The sand fell. The world cracked open. And for the first time in years, though only seconds passed, he breathed. The air in the Department of Mysteries tasted like burnt copper and static. Ron stood in the center of the obsidian circle, his breath shallow, his fingers twitching at his sides. The runes etched into the floor pulsed a sickly green, fading and flaring in time with the distant rhythmic thud of the temporal core. He had lived this moment 12,417 times, give or take a few. He no longer counted. He only remembered. Hermione's voice cut through the haze. "Ron, stay with me. Just one more. We're so close." He looked at her. Really looked. Not at the frantic researcher with ink-stained fingers and hair pulled too tight, but at the woman who had stayed awake for 3 days straight, reciting temporal theory like a prayer. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lower lip chapped from nervous biting, but her hands were steady as she traced the final rune in the air with her wand. Silver light spiraled from the tip, coiling like smoke. "You've got to keep your mind anchored," she said, voice low, urgent. "Think of something real, something before the loop." Ron closed his eyes. The smell of rain on Hogwarts grass, the way the firelight danced in the Gryffindor common room, and her, Hermione, laughing at one of his stupid jokes, her head tipped back, the sound bright and clear, unburdened by time's weight. He held on to that. The hourglass embedded in the chamber wall began to shimmer. Sand, frozen for cycles uncounted, started to fall, grain by grain, slow as breath. The reset was coming, so close, so fragile. "On my mark," Hermione whispered, eyes locked on the falling sand. 3, 2, Ron's chest tightened. Each reset felt heavier now. Like pieces of him were being sanded away, scattered with each repetition. He could feel the edges of his memories slipping. His mother's voice, the name of his first pet rat, the exact shade of Ginny's hair in sunlight. He clung harder to Hermione's laugh. Now, her wand slashed downward. The rune sequence ignited. Crimson, cobalt, gold, spinning around Ron in a helix of ancient magic. The air screamed. The obsidian cracked. For a heartbeat the world stuttered. Then, stillness. Ron gasped. He was still standing. The runes glowed faintly, not the violent green of before, but a soft fading blue. The hourglass had stopped. Sand hung suspended mid-air. "Did it?" he croaked. Hermione didn't answer. She was staring at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're still here," she whispered. "You're really here." He took a step forward. The circle held. No blinding flash, No jolt of disorientation, just the quiet hum of a world that had finally moved forward. "I remember," he said, voice breaking. "I remember all of it. Every time you told me, 'I'm going to fix this, Ron, I promise.' Every time you cried when I forgot your birthday. Every time you kissed my forehead when you thought I couldn't feel it." She stepped into the circle. The runes flared once, warm, not hostile, and let her pass. She touched his face, her fingers trembling. "I thought I'd lose you," she said. "Not just to the loop, to time itself." Ron pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair. It smelled like parchment, peppermint, and sweat, real, tangible hers. "You never did," he murmured. "Even when I forgot everything else, you were always the thing I found again." They stood like that, as the chamber lights flickered back to life, as distant alarms silenced, as the ministry outside resumed its rhythm. The spell was broken, but something else had changed. Not just time, not just the loop, them. Rain lashed the windows of the ministry's Department of Mysteries, each drop cracking like a whip against the enchanted glass. Ron stood in the dim corridor, his breath shallow, hands trembling at his sides. The air smelled of burnt parchment and ozone, thick with the residue of failed spells. He blinked, and the world fractured. One moment he was facing the sealed door of the temporal containment chamber. The next he was sitting across from Hermione in the Burrow's kitchen, sunlight spilling across the table, her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. "You're doing it again," she said, voice soft but firm. "Staring like I've grown a second head." Then, cold stone beneath his palms, the echo of his own scream bouncing off obsidian walls. The hourglass spun madly in his mind, its sand falling upward, sideways, through time itself. He gasped, and suddenly he was back in the corridor, robes singed, ears ringing from the blast that hadn't happened yet. "It's not supposed to feel like this," he whispered. But it had always felt like this, every loop, every repetition. Only now they were colliding. He staggered forward, clutching his head. 100 Hermiones spoke at once. "Ron, focus. You have to let go. I'm so sorry." Their voices layered over one another, a chorus of urgency, sorrow, love. He saw her bending over a stack of ancient tomes, her bushy hair falling into her eyes. Then she was gripping his shoulders, tears streaking her cheeks. Then she was laughing, really laughing, at something he'd said, a sound so warm it made his chest ache. He fell to his knees. The floor wasn't stone anymore. It was grass, damp, from morning dew. The Burrow's orchard. He remembered this, though he remembered 1,000 moments like this. The way her hand brushed his when they walked side by side. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. "You're still here," he choked out. "I'm always here," she answered, but the voice came from 3 places at once. From behind him, from inside his head, from a memory he hadn't lived yet. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the images burned brighter. Hermione pacing in the ministry archives, quills flying as she scribbled equations. Hermione screaming his name as the containment field collapsed. Hermione whispering, "I love you," in a quiet moment he didn't remember, but must have happened, because he could feel it, deep in his bones. "I'm losing time," he said. "I'm losing me." "No," she said. And this time, it was just one voice. Clear, close, real. She opened his eyes. She was kneeling in front of him, her hands cradling his face. Her skin was warm, her breath smelled of peppermint and exhaustion. Her eyes, brown, fierce, alive, held his. "This isn't the loop," she said. "This is now. You're here, with me. But I've seen this before," he whispered. 100 times. 1,000. "And each time you came back to me," she said. "Not because of the magic, because of this." He felt it then, the thread between them, thin but unbreakable. Not fate, not enchantment. Choice. Every time he chose to look for her. Every time he reached for her hand, even when he didn't know why. Every time he said her name like a prayer. The world trembled, the hourglass cracked. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know," she said. "But you're not alone." And for the first time he believed it. The air stilled. The voices ceased. The fragments of time settled like dust. He took her hand, and the loop broke. The air thickened like syrup, each breath of labor. Ron blinked, and the world stretched, sound flattening into a low hum, raindrops hanging mid-air like glass beads caught in invisible threads. The clock on the ministry wall had stopped, its hands fused at exactly 659. He could feel the weight of the hourglass around his neck, cold and heavy, its sand suspended in a single impossible grain at the narrowest point. Hermione stood before him, one hand outstretched, her lips parted mid-sentence. "Ron, hold on." But her voice dragged like a record played underwater. He tried to reach for her, but his arm moved through resistance, as if pushing through liquid lead. Still, he strained forward, inch by agonizing inch, until his fingers brushed hers. A jolt surged through him, not pain, but recognition. Her skin was warm, alive, real. He focused every shred of will into closing that gap. Their fingers interlocked, and in that contact, something shifted. The world didn't speed up. It didn't need to. Time wasn't flowing anymore. It was breathing, slow, deliberate, like the pause between heartbeats. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in countless loops she saw him. Not the echo, not the fractured memory, but Ron. The corners of her lips trembled, lifting in a smile so fragile it could shatter with a breath. "You're still here," she whispered, and though the words took forever to form, he understood them instantly. "I never left," he answered, voice rough from disuse, from screaming into silence too many times to count. Tears welled in her eyes, suspended like dew on lashes. "I've been trying every loop I changed something, a word, a spell, the angle of the wand. But you were slipping further each time. I could see it in your eyes, like you were forgetting how to be you." He swallowed. "I remember every time you told me to breathe, even when I didn't know why. I did it, because it was you saying it." She squeezed his hand. "You were holding on. For me?" "No," he said softly. "For us, for this. The way you tilt your head when you're worried. The way you say my name when you think I'm being thick, but you still smile. I never noticed before. Not really. But in the loops, when everything else blurred, those things stayed." Her breath hitched. "Ron, I kept reliving the same hour," he continued. "But you kept changing, growing, trying. And I stayed the same, stuck. But now, I see. Maybe the loop wasn't just a trap. Maybe it was a chance. A chance for what? To stop running. To stop pretending that I don't." The air pulsed. The grain of sand shifted. Just slightly. Hermione's voice sharpened with urgency. "Say it now. Before it resets, please." He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him cracked open. "I love you, Hermione. Not because you're trying to save me. Not because you're brilliant, though you are. Not because you're the only one who never gave up. But because you're you. And I've loved you in every loop, in every version of this hour. And if time starts again, I'll love you then too." She didn't speak. She leaned forward slowly, impossibly, and pressed her forehead to his. Their breaths mingled in the stillness. "I've loved you," she whispered. "Longer than you know." The hourglass trembled. A single grain of sand fell, and time exhaled. Ron gasped as the air cracked like thin ice, the world lurching into stillness. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the clock didn't reset. The golden hands of the shattered hourglass froze mid-fall, then crumbled, grain by grain, into a soft shimmering dust that swirled in the stale ministry air like dying fireflies. He dropped to his knees, his breath ragged, muscles trembling as if he'd been running for years instead of living the same 60 minutes, thousands of times over. The silence was deafening, no echo of footsteps resetting at precisely 3:14 p.m., no distant hum of the containment chamber recharging. No Hermione saying "Wrong, focus," for the 1000th, or was it millionth, time, just stillness. Real, unbroken stillness. He looked up. Hermione stood before him, her face pale, eyes wide with something between terror and triumph. Her fingers trembled at her sides, still clutching the fractured remains of the temporal stabilizer, a cracked wand of obsidian and starlight alloy that had been her final gambit. Sweat streaked her temple, and her hair, frayed from days without sleep, clung to her damp skin, but she was smiling. Not the tight, hopeful curve she'd worn in cycles past, the one that broke when the hour reset. This was different, whole, real. "You're back," she whispered, Ron tried to speak, but his voice caught, raw from screams that had never left the loop. He swallowed, tasting copper and dust. "It's over?" She nodded, stepping forward. Her boots crunched over the remnants of the hourglass. The feedback cascade collapsed the loop's anchor point. The magic unraveled itself. "You're free." He stared at his hands, calloused, scratched, real. Not the ghostly after-images he'd seen flicker in prior cycles, when time stuttered. He could feel the cold stone floor beneath his knees, the ache in his joints, the weight of his own breath. For the first time in too long, he was present. Entirely. "I thought I'd forgotten what silence sounded like," he said, voice hoarse. Hermione sank down beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "I thought I'd lost you." He turned to look at her. The light from the fractured ceiling streamed in beams, catching the gold in her eyes, the faint freckle just beneath her left eyebrow. The one he'd only noticed on cycle 312, when he'd stopped panicking and started watching. Really watching. He'd memorized the rhythm of her pulse at her wrist, the way she tucked her lower lip between her teeth when she was afraid to hope. He'd lived lifetimes in that hour, and everyone had led him back to her. "I wasn't gone," he said. "I was just stuck, watching you try to save me, over and over." She closed her eyes and I kept failing. "No," he said softly. "You didn't. Not this time." A tear slipped free, tracing a clean line down her cheek. He reached up, thumb brushing it away. The touch sent a shiver through him. Not magic, not time, just warmth. Human. "You stayed," he said. "Even when I forgot your name, even when I screamed at you to leave, you stayed." "I promised I would," she whispered. "I wasn't going to let time take you from me." He laughed. A broken, breathless sound. "You always were better with time than I was." She leaned her forehead against his, their breath mingling. "It wasn't time that saved you, Ron. It was you. You held on. Even when it hurt. Even when it didn't make sense. You held on." He closed his eyes. The world was steady. The future was unwritten. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, it felt like something to reach for. Outside, the ministry alarms finally fell silent. Somewhere a clock ticked forward, just once, and kept going. The first thing he noticed was the light, thin, pale, and filtered through a high hospital window, casting soft rectangles across the floor. It wasn't the harsh, flickering kind that had pulsed in the ministry chamber during the final loop, the one where he'd screamed her name into a collapsing timeline. No, this light was real, stable. He blinked slowly, eyelids heavy as if stitched with lead thread, and tried to move his fingers. They twitched, barely, but they responded. That was something. He turned his head, a slow, painful pivot, and there she was. Hermione sat slumped in a flimsy wooden chair, her head resting against the edge of the bed, one hand still curled loosely around his. Her hair, wild as ever, had fallen across her cheek, and her breathing was deep and even. She was asleep, really asleep. Not the kind of half-dozed vigil she'd kept for weeks, according to the nurses who'd whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. No dreams of collapsing corridors or repeating voices. Just sleep, Ron exhaled, long and shaky, feeling the ache in his chest like a bruise that had settled into his bones. He remembered. Too much and too little. The loop had been 1,000 sunrises in 1 hour, a spiral of seconds he'd lived until they blurred into a single suffocating moment. He'd seen Hermione cry in 17 different ways. He'd heard her say, "I'm sorry," in every tone imaginable, desperate, furious, broken, tender. He'd memorized the freckle just below her left ear, the way her bottom lip trembled when she lied about being tired, the rhythm of her breath when she thought no one was listening. And now there was silence, real silence. He squeezed her hand gently, and she stirred, her fingers tightening almost unconsciously around his. Her eyes fluttered open, dark with sleep, then widened. "Ron," she whispered, voice hoarse. You're awake." He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, cracked like old parchment. She reached for the water on the bedside table, her movements clumsy with exhaustion, and held the cup to his lips. The water was cool, almost sweet. He drank slowly, watching her. "You're really here," she said, setting the cup down. Her eyes shone. "It's over. The loop. It broke. You're out." He nodded, then croaked. "How long?" 3 days. You've been unconscious since they pulled you from the containment field. The healer said your mind needed time to reintegrate. She swallowed. I was so afraid you wouldn't come back, that you'd be trapped in there even after the machine failed. He looked at her, really looked. The circles under her eyes, the frayed edge of her sleeve where she'd been chewing it in her sleep, the way her hands trembled slightly as she tucked her hair behind her ear. He'd seen versions of her, countless versions. But this one was different. This one had waited. This one had fought. I saw you, he said, voice still weak, every time. Even when I didn't know what was happening, I saw you, she spilled over. She didn't wipe them away. I was trying to reach you. I changed the equations, adjusted the resonance frequency, begged the unspeakables to let me near the core. Anything. I thought if I could just sync with your wavelength, even for a second, I could pull you back. He managed a small smile. You did. In the end, it was your voice. I heard you, through all of it. Like a thread I could follow. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his hand. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered. He turned his palm up, lacing his fingers through hers. You never did. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the linoleum. Somewhere down the hall, a healer laughed. A child cried. A world moved forward, unspooling in real time. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ron Weasley was moving with it. The clock on the wall ticks. Ron hears it. Always the clock. It ticks too loud, like it's mocking him. He stares at the second hand as it stutters forward, jerky and uneven, as if time itself is catching its breath. His fingers trace the rim of a chipped teacup, the porcelain warm. From tea he hasn't drunk. Steam still curls from the surface, but the scent, cinnamon, maybe, or bergamot, fades each time he blinks. He tries to remember what it tasted like. He can't. Across the table, Hermione is speaking. Her lips move, her eyes are sharp with urgency. But the words dissolve before they reach him. Not gone, just blurred, like ink in water. He catches fragments. Field collapse. Resonance frequency. You have to hold on. He nods because she expects it. He's nodded 1,000 times before. Or is it the first? He looks at her hands. They're steady, always steady. The way her fingers tap the edge of her notebook. 3 quick raps, then a pause. Same every time. He knows this now. He knows the way her hair catches the low light of the ministry's sub-level lab, how a single strand always escapes and curls just behind her ear. He knows the exact shade of worry in her eyes, hazel, flecked with gold when she's afraid. But he can't remember yesterday. Not really, not before the loop, he thinks. No, he feels that something is missing. Not an object, not a word, a moment, a feeling. Something that happened between them, just once, that hasn't repeated. A touch that wasn't clinical, a laugh that wasn't strained. He reaches for it, and his head splits with the effort. Ron. Her voice cuts through the fog. Can you hear me? He blinks. Yeah, I'm here. You're fading, she says, softer now. Your biometrics are destabilizing, the loop's eating at your neural pathways. He wants to tell her he remembers more than she thinks. That he's lived this hour so many times he could recite her words before she says them. That he's counted the cracks in the ceiling, 12. That he's memorized the way her jumper rides up when she stretches, just a sliver of skin above her wrist. That he's noticed, for the first time, how she bites the inside of her cheek when she's hiding fear. But he doesn't say any of that. Instead, he asks, Have we ever had tea like this? Just us. Not in a lab. Not like this. She hesitates. A flicker. Something crosses her face. Surprise? Grief? You mean, outside of work? I mean, before all this. Her pen stills. Yes, she says quietly. We have. When? She looks down. You wouldn't remember. That's just it, he says, voice cracking. I do. I feel it. Like a word on the tip of my tongue. A summer day. You were wearing that blue scarf, the one Ginny knitted you. We were by the lake. You laughed because I dropped my sandwich in the water. Her breath catches. He doesn't know where the memory came from. It wasn't in the last loop, or the one before. But it feels true. It is true. That was real, she whispers. Then why doesn't it happen now? He asks. Why is it not part of the loop? Her eyes glisten. Because the loop isn't real. It's a fracture. A broken piece of time. It only holds what's repeated, what's necessary for the spell. Not the moments in between. The moments that matter, he says. She reaches across the table. Her hand covers his. Warm. Real. The first time she's touched him without checking a pulse or adjusting a sensor. You have to hold on, she says. Not just for the spell. For us. For what comes after. He squeezes her hand. What if I forget you? You won't, she says. Fierce now. Because I'm not letting go. Not this time. The clock ticks. The steam fades. The world trembles on the edge of reset. But for one fragile second, he remembers her. Not as a scientist, not as a savior. As the woman he loves. The air in the library was thick with dust and the quiet hum of ancient spells, the kind that clung to old parchment and didn't like to be disturbed. Ron stood just inside the doorway, his fingers still pressed against the cold stone frame, as if bracing himself against the next reset. But this time something was different. This time she didn't look up. Hermione sat at the long oak table near the restricted section, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, tendrils escaping like sparks from a wand. In front of her lay a leather-bound journal, its edges frayed, ink smudged in places where her fingers had trembled. She was writing again. No, not writing. Scribbling, as if time were running out, and perhaps it was. Hermione, Ron said, voice low. It's me, again. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just turned the page. And then she spoke without lifting her eyes. I know. I always know it's you, Ron, even when the world forgets. He froze. You, what? This is the 47th time you've walked through that door, she said, still writing. 47 times I've watched you hesitate, like you're afraid I won't see you. Like you're afraid I'll treat you like a stranger. But I never do. I can't. Ron's breath caught. The loop had always been his prison. He hadn't known, couldn't have known. She was aware, too. I started noticing patterns, she continued, flipping another page. Small things. The way you touch the door frame. How you say my name. Like it's fragile. At first I thought it was déjà vu. Then I realized you were remembering. And slowly I began to remember too. Not the loop, not at first, but you, always you. She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but sharp, so sharp it hurt to meet them. I've been keeping track, she said, sliding the journal toward him. Every time you vanish, every time the clock resets, I mark it, I write it down. Sometimes I scream, sometimes I cry. I always write. Ron stepped forward, heart thudding. He opened the journal, page after page, dates, calculations, diagrams of temporal fields, equations that bled into one another like tears on paper. But between them, scrawled in the margins, underlined, circled, were other words, personal, raw. He smiled today, not the usual grin, the one that starts in his eyes. I think he was trying to hide it, but I saw. I always see. I told him the spell wouldn't work. He hugged me anyway. Said, you're brilliant, even when you're wrong. I don't know if he meant it, but I wish I could keep that moment. He asked if I was tired. No one ever asks me that. I wanted to cry. Ron's fingers trembled as he turned the pages. The entries weren't just research. They were confessions. Quiet, aching things hidden between the science. You wrote all this. For me, he whispered. For us, she corrected gently. I didn't know if you'd ever see it, but I had to believe you would. I had to believe there was a way out. He looked at her, really looked. The shadows under her eyes, the way her hands clenched around her quill, even now, the weight of days, weeks, of waiting, of hoping. You've been alone through all of this, he said. No, she said softly. I've had you, just not all at once. He closed the journal and placed it back on the table. Then he reached for her hand. Warm, real. I see you now, he said. Not just the loop, not just the problem to solve. I see you. She smiled then, one from the journal, the one that started in her eyes. And for the first time, the hour didn't feel endless. It felt like a beginning. Thus motes swirled in the slanted afternoon light, catching on the frayed edges of parchment strewn across the kitchen table. Ron blinked, his fingers twitching against the worn wood. Again. He knew it before the clock struck 3, before the kettle began its low whistle, before the first crackle of magical residue curled through the air like smoke from a dying fire. His breath hitched, not from surprise, but from the dull, gnawing certainty of repetition. Hermione stood by the counter, her back to him, stirring something in a chipped enamel pot. The motion was precise, measured, 3 clockwise stirs, a pause, then 1 counterclockwise. He'd counted them once, then twice. Then so many times he could mimic her rhythm in his sleep. Her hair caught the light in 1,000 chestnut strands, and there, just above her left ear, a single curl escaped the loose knot. She always wore on days like this. He hadn't noticed that the first time, or the 10th. "Ron," she said, not turning. "They're staring." He swallowed. "You always say that." She glanced over her shoulder, brow furrowed. "I do? Yeah, same tone, same look." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You don't remember, do you?" Hermione set the spoon down with quiet finality. The air between them thickened, charged with the scent of simmering herbs and something older. Ozone, maybe, or the metallic tang of spent magic. She turned fully now, arms crossed, eyes searching his. "I remember trying, Ron. Every hour, every failed recalibration. I remember the moment the containment field collapsed, and you vanished into the glass." He looked down. The hourglass sat between them, its silver sand frozen mid-fall, the frame cracked like lightning frozen in obsidian. It pulsed faintly, a slow, almost imperceptible throb. Not light, but warmth, as if something inside still breathed. "I've lived this hour 100 times," he whispered. "Maybe more. I've seen you cry. I've seen you screamed. I've seen you give up and start again." His voice cracked. "I've seen you wear that blue jumper 7 times. This one, the green, is the 8th. You only wear it when you're trying to feel normal." Hermione's breath caught. She looked down at her sweater, then back at him. "You remember all of it? Everything. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. How you pause before saying my name like you're checking if I'm really there. The way your voice softens when you think I'm not listening." He reached out, not touching her, but hovering just above her hand. "I never noticed before. Not really." She didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled. "Then you know I haven't stopped. Not once." "I know." He looked at the hourglass. "But it's not just the spell, is it? It's us. Something's holding it open, not the Ministry's magic. Ours." She went very still. "What are you saying?" "The loop resets time, but not memory. Not feeling. Every time you reach for me, even when I vanish, it leaves a mark. On the magic. On me." He touched the glass. "Warm. Alive. It's not broken, Hermione. It's changed. Like us." The single tear slipped free, tracing a quiet path down her cheek. "Then maybe the answer isn't in reversing the spell. Maybe it's in letting it be." The clock ticked. 1 minute to 3. Ron stood, slow, deliberate. He stepped around the table, close enough to feel the heat of her breath, the unspoken years between them tightening like a coiled spell. "Then let's not fix it," he said. "Let's finish it." She looked up, eyes wide, glistening. "Together? Together?" The hourglass flared. Not with light, but with color, swirling gold and amber, and deep, impossible violet. The sand began to fall, not backward, not forward, but through. And for the first time in 100 loops, Ron Weasley smiled as the world changed. The Auror's shoes clicked against the polished marble-like clockwork, each step a measured beat in the silence that followed. Ron sat across from them, fingers curled around the warm handle of a teacup that never cooled, steam rising in the same perfect curl cycle after cycle. He didn't need to look up to know the man. Percival Thorne, Department of Mysteries, voice like parchment dragged over stone, was about to repeat the same question for the 12th time. "We must insist, Miss Granger. The Tempus Locus is classified Ministry property. Its retrieval is not optional." Hermione stood by the window, arms crossed, her silhouette sharp against the dim glow of the Ministry's enchanted skylight. She didn't turn. "It's not a relic, Thorne. It's a prison, and Ron's still inside it." "He's not inside anything," snapped the junior official, a woman with silver-rimmed spectacles, and a quill that scribbled without pause. "He's experiencing a temporal echo, a glitch." Once the artifact is secured, we can stabilize the field. Ron exhaled, watching the steam tremble. He'd heard this before. He'd heard them all dismiss him as a statistical anomaly, a side effect. But he felt it. The weight of the hour pressing down, the way the seconds stretched like taffy before snapping back. He'd lived this conversation so many times he could mouth the words before they were spoken. "I'm not giving it to you," Hermione said. Quiet but unyielding. "Not while it's still active." Thorn leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And what makes you think you can manage it better than trained personnel? You're emotionally compromised. You've been here for how many hours? Days? You haven't slept." "I've slept," she said. "I've also read every paper on nonlinear temporal resonance, cross-referenced the Weasley family's exposure to cursed objects, and mapped the decay pattern in Ron's memory recall. I know how it works." "You think you do," Thorn corrected. "But emotions cloud judgment. You're clinging to sentiment." Ron watched her. In this cycle, a loose curl had escaped her bun and hung near her jaw. In the last one, it hadn't. In the one before, she'd worn her hair down. He'd started counting the variations, how often she blinked, the precise moment her voice softened when she said his name, the way her fingers tapped her forearm when she was holding back tears. He remembered the first time he'd noticed her doing that. 6th year. Hospital wing. He'd eaten a love potion by accident, and rambled about Fleur Delacour's hair. She'd tapped her arm then too. He hadn't understood why. Now he did. "I'm not clinging," Hermione said, turning at last. Her eyes found his, and for a heartbeat, the room stilled. "Unfighting. Ron's mind is unraveling one loop at a time. If you take that hourglass now, you'll sever his anger. He'll forget why he's fighting to return. He'll forget me." Thorn's jaw tightened. "Sentiment won't rewrite the laws of time." "No," Hermione said, "but love might bend them." Ron swallowed. He hadn't told her that. Not in so many words. But she'd said it anyway. The junior official cleared her throat. "The Ministry cannot endorse emotional interference in temporal recovery. We're authorized to seize the artifact by order of the Wisengamot." Hermione didn't flinch. "Then you'll have to go through me." Ron set the cup down. It made no sound. Nothing ever did. At this moment, the clock above the door paused, 10:47, its hands trembling, as if afraid to move. He stood. His legs felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else, someone who'd walked 1,000 identical corridors. "You don't get it," he said, voice rough with unshed cycles. "Every time I wake up and see her, it's the only thing that feels real. You can take your rules and your protocols, but she's the one who remembers me when no one else can." Hermione turned fully now, her eyes wide, glistening. And then, just for a breath, the clock stuttered. Not reset, stuttered. The rain fell in soft silver sheets over the Thames, blurring the lights of the city into smudges of gold and crimson. Ron pulled his coat tighter, though he didn't feel the cold. Not really. He had felt nothing but the weight of repetition, the quiet ache of time folding back on itself. But tonight, for the first time in cycles he'd lost count of, he was walking beside her, not in a lab, not in sterile silence, but through the winding streets of London, where the world still moved forward. Hermione walked with her shoulders slightly hunched, not from cold, but from thought, her brow furrowed faintly, as though she were still calculating probabilities in her head. But then she glanced at him, and something softened in her eyes. "You're quiet," she said. "So are you," he replied, managing a small smile. She exhaled, a breath that fogged in the air between them. "I'm just trying to remember what it feels like to not be afraid." Ron looked down at his hands. "I think I've forgotten what it feels like to not remember everything." They turned onto a quiet path beside the river, the cobbles slick and glistening. A lone swan drifted beneath the arch of a stone bridge, its reflection broken and reassembled by the ripple of raindrops. "I used to think time was a straight line," Hermione said softly. "Something you could measure, predict, trust. But now I wonder if it's more like a river. It flows, yes, but it eddies. It doubles back. Sometimes it drowns things before they've had a chance to breathe." Ron stopped walking and turned to face her. "And what if you're caught in one of those eddies?" She met his gaze. "Then someone has to reach in," he swallowed. "What if they can't? Then you have to reach back." A silence settled between them, not heavy, but full, like the space before a storm breaks. Ron had lived this hour 12 times. No, 13. He had seen her try every solution, every spell, every desperate incantation known to wizard code. He had watched her cry at her desk, her face buried in her hands, whispering equations like prayers. He had seen her give up. He had seen her try again. But this walk, this was new. Or maybe not new, but different. A variation in the pattern. "You didn't mention the containment field this time," he said. She blinked. "No, I didn't." "Why?" "Because I wanted to remember what it was like to talk to you without a clock ticking over our heads." Ron looked out at the river. "Funny thing is, I can remember every word you've ever said to me in these loops. Every tone, every pause. But tonight, you sound different." She let out a quiet laugh. "Maybe I am, or maybe I'm finally listening." A barge passed under the bridge, its horn low and mournful. The rain had eased to a mist, clinging to their hair and lashes. Hermione tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear, and Ron noticed, really noticed, the way her fingers trembled, just slightly. "You've been holding yourself together for me," he said. "I'm holding myself together for both of us." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I've been waiting for you to stop trying to fix me," he whispered, "and just stay with me." Her breath caught. "Ron, I don't know how many more times I can do this. Wake up, see you, lose you. But if this is the moment, if this is the one that matters, then I don't want to spend it talking about temporal anchors or reversal matrices. I want to spend it here, with you, even if it's raining, even if it's cold, even if it's just once." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled, the kind of smile that carries years in its curve. "Then, let's make it count." And as the city hummed around them, as the water whispered beneath the stones, Ron felt something shift, not in time, but in himself. For the first time, he wasn't waiting for the loop to break. He was choosing to be present, and that perhaps was the first true step toward breaking free. "The first time I didn't notice anything, not really. You were pacing, left, right, left, your robes brushing against the edge of the desk, muttering equations under your breath like a prayer. I remember thinking you looked tired. Dark circles, messy bun, that quill behind your ear. But I didn't see you. Not yet. By the 12th loop, I started counting your steps. 27 across the room, pivot, 27 back. You always paused at the window when the clock struck 10 minutes before the reset. You'd press your palm against the glass, as if checking for warmth. I asked why once. "The spell's resonance," you said. "It's weaker near the stone." I didn't understand, but I remembered the way your fingers trembled. The 33rd time, I noticed your hands, not just their movement, writing, flipping pages, clutching your wand, but the way they moved when you thought no one was watching. How you'd rub your thumb over your knuckles when you were nervous. How you tucked your hair behind your ear even when it wasn't loose. Such small things. I never saw them before. Not really. 42 loops in. I learned the exact shade of your eyes when you're frustrated. Not just brown, hazel, really, with flecks of gold near the pupil, like embers caught in a storm. You'd stare at the runes on the containment field. Yao Jiao Sha Chun. No, biting your lip. Always the left side. I wanted to tell you to stop. And always left a faint red mark. You cried once. I don't know which loop. Maybe the 49th. You thought I hadn't woken up yet. You were slumped in the chair, your head in your hands, shoulders shaking. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched the way your breath hitched, the way a single tear slid down and landed on your notes, blurring the ink. I wanted to reach for you. But I knew, if I broke the pattern the loop might fracture. Or worse, you'd think it was working. So I stayed still, pretended to sleep, and hated myself. On loop 58, I counted your breaths, 16 per minute, steady. I timed them against the pulse in your neck, visible just beneath your ear. I memorized the rhythm. I could fall asleep to it, if I ever got the chance. Loop 59. You brought tea. Not the ministry gruel, but real tea. Earl Grey, with a splash of honey. You always took it that way. I never knew. You handed me the cup, and your pinky brushed mine. A second, maybe less. But I felt it. Warmth, texture. The faint callus on your finger from writing. I held that cup until the reset, even after the tea went cold. I didn't drink it. I just stared at the spot where your hand had been. Now, I'm learning the way you say my name. Not just the sound, Ron, but the way your voice softens on the second syllable. When you're worried. When you're hopeful. When you're trying not to cry. You said it 317 times in as many loops. Each time different. Each time breaking me a little more. I used to think time was a line. Forward. One step after another. But now I know it's a spiral, and every time I circle back, I see you clearer. Not the Hermione I thought I knew, the brilliant one, the bossy one, the friend, but the one who forgets to eat when she's working, who hums when she's concentrating, who wears your mother's scarf in winter, even though it's too short. And I'm starting to wonder if the loop isn't the prison. Maybe it's the gift, because without it, I would have never seen you. Not truly. And now that I've memorized the slope of your shoulders, the way your nose wrinkles when you're lying, the exact second, your eyes light up when you think you've solved it. I don't know if I can let go, even if it means staying here, forever, because I'd rather live the same hour 1,000 times if it means watching you try to save me, again and again and again. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window of the burrow, golden and unbroken, painting stripes across the worn wooden table. Ron stirred his tea absently, watching the steam curl and vanish into the air. It rose, dissipated, and did not rewind. He blinked slowly, then exhaled, long and deep, as if surfacing after years beneath ice. Hermione sat across from him, her fingers wrapped around her own cup, her eyes tired but clear. She didn't look up at first. Instead, she traced the rim of her mug with her thumb, thoughtful, as though testing the reality of the moment. Then she lifted her gaze, and when their eyes met, something fragile and tender passed between them. Relief, wonder, the quiet awe of having survived. "It's over?" Ron asked, voice low, still hesitant to believe. "It's over," she confirmed, and a small smile touched her lips. The temporal anchor collapsed. The loop's broken. Time's moving forward, normally. Ron nodded, but he didn't speak. He watched the way the light caught the faint gold in her hair, how a strand had come loose and curled near her ear. He he knew. How many times he'd seen that same strand fall just so. How many times he'd wanted to tuck it back, but never had. In the loop, he'd counted the seconds between her blinks, memorized the cadence of her breath, studied the way her nose wrinkled when she concentrated. But now, none of it felt obsessive. It felt like seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her, after years of looking past. Outside, a robin sang from the apple tree. The sound didn't repeat. It finished, and then there was silence, and then another note, different, new. Ron closed his eyes and listened. No reset, no snap, back to the same stifling moment. Just time, gentle, unspooling time. "I kept thinking I'd forget," he said quietly. "Even when I remembered everything, I was scared that once it ended, it would all slip away." Like a dream, Hermione reached across the table, her hand finding his. Her skin was warm, real. "You won't forget, and even if you did, I'd remember for you." He turned his hand to lace his fingers with hers. "I noticed things," he admitted, over and over. "The way you say my name when you're worried. The way you bite your lip when you're trying not to cry. I never paid attention before." She didn't look away. "Maybe you needed to. Maybe I didn't deserve to see it until now." "That's not true," she said firmly. "You've always cared. You just show it differently." He smiled faintly. "I want to show it better." The clock on the wall ticked. Steady, unhurried. One sound after another. Each unique, each gone, as soon as it came. Ron watched the second hand sweep forward, not flicker back, and he felt something inside him settle. "I kept trying to fix it," he said. "Every time I thought, if I could just say the right thing, do the right thing, I could break the loop." "But it wasn't about fixing anything, was it?" Hermione shook her head. "It was about understanding. About you realizing you weren't alone in it. That I was trying to reach you, even when you couldn't see me." He swallowed. "I could always see you. That was the one thing that never changed." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, the morning stretching around them like a held breath, finally released. Somewhere upstairs, a door opened. Footsteps creaked across the floor. Ginny called out a greeting, and the sound traveled down the stairs, ordinary. And hold, Ron looked at Hermione again. What now? She squeezed his hand. Now we move forward. Together, one moment at a time. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the next moment wasn't something to fear. It was something to meet. Slowly, gently, hand in hand.